Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is a very special live edition of the Candice Malcolm Show. We are here to broadcast on the French language debate, folks. It's finally here. If you're anything like me, you wish that there were more of these debates. I wish that we had more of an opportunity to get to know the candidates, to get to know specifically Mark Carney. And he's new to the scene in politics. We haven't known him very well for very long. Even just as recently as like 3 months ago, his name recognition among Canadians was like single-digit percentage. So we have tonight and tomorrow, the two opportunities to get to know the candidates. So there's a lot of pressure. A lot of people are predicting, especially on the conservative political right side, that Pierre Poilievre will just like mop the floor with Mark Carney and that it's going to be a bloodbath. I personally am rooting for that. I hope that's what happens. I don't want to set expectations too high, though, because I know that Mark Carney has been working in overdrive to practice his French, to make sure that he is hitting the absolute correct tones. But I think tonight's debate may even prove to be more important than tomorrow night's debate, because it really, for Mark Carney and the Liberals, they must win in Quebec. They must win big in the suburbs around Montreal in order to win this election. And so in some ways, even though, I would have much preferred to see a Carney versus Pierre Poilievre one-on-one debate tonight. It annoys me that we have the NDP up there, which will be just grandstanding left-wing issues. Same with the Bloc. They have no chance of forming a government. They're not a national party, and yet they're there. And yet tonight, I think that is very important, because if Jagmeet Singh performs well and is able to capture back many of those left-wing voters who have shifted to Mark Carney, that could be very good for the Conservatives. And if the Bloc leader, Francois Blanchette, performs well, that could also be good for the Conservatives, because if he's able to pick up that support in suburban Montreal, again, it will help the Conservatives with their road to victory. Now, I also want to point out something that I think is fantastic, and that is that the Greens have been removed from the debate tonight. We were reporting this from Juno News. And this is like karma. This is just beautiful cosmic justice, folks, because this idea that the Greens, I mean, they're polling at like 3% nationally. It's not really a party at this point. It's more just like a bumper sticker. And they decided, they made a strategic decision to not run candidates in safe conservative seats. So they decided to pull out of the places that they didn't think they could win against the Conservatives. And because of that, they got removed from the debate, which is great news for Canadians, because that's one fewer irrelevant party leader that Canadians have to listen to, more time on the candidates that could actually win this election. Now, I reported this earlier. I'm very excited. We have 3 reporters on the ground at the event in Montreal, including my co-founder at Juno News here, Kian Bexty. And then True North has been able to send 2 reporters. They've all been accepted by the Debates Commission. Remember, this entire debate is run by the government. Of course, True created a new government department to manage the debate. It's like, really, we need government for this. The private media consortium used to do it, and they did just fine. It was just fine before. But Trudeau likes to involve government in every aspect of our lives. And so it's a government thing. And because of that, you have to apply in advance. And we've had issues in the past where they tried to deny us and say, you're not journalists. Actually, in 2019, we sued the government. I don't know if you remember that, but in 2019, my reporter at the time was Andrew Lawton. We applied to get him into the debates. He was rejected at the 11th hour, and it was all very mysterious the way they rejected. The email came from a different government department than the department that was running the debates. It came through the parliamentary press gallery. There was a whole bunch of things that just didn't add up. So we decided, hey, we're going to sue and try to get in. At that time, Ezra Levant at the Rebel heard that we were suing and called me up and said, hey, we're going to sue too. And so we both sued. They put our case together, and it was a very exciting day. We were in downtown Toronto at the courts. I actually brought my son with me. He was a baby at the time, because I didn't have a babysitter. I was on maternity leave, and so I brought him with me. We were at the courts, and we ended up getting an emergency injunction, and the judge ordered that True North and the Rebel be accepted. So Andrew Lawton jumped on a plane. Interestingly, Ezra Levant and the Rebel sent their journalist, Kian Bexty. Kian Bexty was their correspondent and their reporter. So they got on airplanes and flew to Ottawa for the debate. And to me, that was the best moment of the debate, because hearing Andrew Lawton get to ask his question about press freedom, hearing Kian Bexty get to ask his question, at the time, the scandal was blackface, and asking basically Justin Trudeau, well, he asked if he had called any African leaders to apologize. And then he followed up with a great question about that West Point Grey Academy yearbook. And so I'm looking forward to that again. We have 3 of our reporters on the ground, like I said. Now, interestingly, the debate is being held at the CBC building in Montreal. And Kian Bexty is reporting to me, he's just texting me right now, saying that the CBC has banned him from doing any live hits. So he was going to call into this show and he was going to tell us about what was happening. But because he is on their property, they allowed the CBC to have a booth and they're allowed to do a live broadcast, but nobody else is allowed to. Of course, when you are the government, when you are part of the government, which the CBC basically is, you have the control, the regime control. And so that is what is happening. Kian saying that the debate is on their property at the Radio Canada building. They told us to take our equipment, go outside. But of course, if you go outside, you lose your spot in line. And there's sort of a game theory behind getting a question to the right leader. And so part of the reason we have 3 guys there is so that they could properly queue and make sure that they're in the right position, that they will hopefully get a question to Mark Carney, as well as Pierre Poilievre and the other leaders as well. So I'm going to throw to a clip. We have a clip from Clayton Domain. So the True North journalists that are there are Alex Zoltan and Clayton Domain. Here is Clayton Domain doing a stand-up from the debate in Montreal.
Thanks, Candace. Yeah, so I'm here with True North at the French debates. I was going to join the call inside, but I was chased out by staff. It is really cold, wet, and damp. I don't know if you could tell. We didn't have the luxury of having a warm tent set up to broadcast from, as the CBC has. Alex Zoltan will be asking our questions, hopefully, to the leaders after the French debate as they come out. Our plan is just to be on our feet and try to get into the line as soon as possible and ask our relevant questions to the relevant candidates. I even asked where the Q&A line was going to be, and I was told that we would have to find out, and they couldn't tell us. So we're really going to be keeping an eye out and trying to get those questions in. Yeah, there was a Palestinian protest as well that showed up, and they tried to drown out the Poilievre and Carney supporters. Notably, not a single NDP supporter came out to welcome the leaders as they came in. I guess you could say maybe some of the pro-Palestinian crowd might have been the NDP supporters, but not a single orange sign for Jagmeet Singh. Not a Bloc Québécois sign. So it was really just the Carney supporters, Poilievre, and Poilievre supporters, and the pro-Palestine people. So of course we're going to be watching the debate, and hopefully we get our questions in. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Clayton. We're really looking forward to that. And of course, there's a Palestinian protest. What would a Canadian election debate be without the Hamasniks out there making fools of themselves? Okay, I am joined by a special guest, a guest co-host today, David Knight-Legg, one of my favorite guests on the Candace Malcolm Show. David, are you there? Can you hear me?
I'm here. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So, well, first of all, before we get to our conversation, I just want to say we're on YouTube and we turn on the super chat feature. I've never done it before, but we got them rolling in. Stefano has given us $139. Wow, thank you so much, Stefano. He writes, Candace, thank you. Let's go, Pierre. Yes, okay. So keep those super chats coming, folks. David, what is your prediction? What are you looking forward to tonight?
Oh, I think this is going to be great. I think Canada's unique in that we've got the Quebec factor in play, and that's going to be really interesting because it means that, Pierre has an advantage in the French language skills, and I think if he plays it right, he's going to be able to emphasize that, and I hope that he comes up with some fun turns of phrase that it'll take Mark Carney a little while to grok. I think Mark Carney's been very lucky with the dynamics in Quebec. The fear factor, the boomer factor, the fact that they get all of their media through state-run television, and that's had a direct effect on what you're seeing the polling numbers look like. I think Blanchette's come out looking very much like he's going to attack that. And I think of the 5 different things that they're going to debate, that issue around immigration, identity, those are going to be the issues where you're going to see a really interesting dynamic. And Carney has not shown that he's very agile in figuring out what principled perspective he's willing to take. and defend. So the problems he's gotten into the last few weeks, and you're starting to see it in his poll numbers, are that he doesn't take a principled position and defend it. He borrows a couple of conservative policies, and then when push comes to shove or gets challenged on those in a place like Quebec, he basically implies that he's not going to actually follow through on pipelines, things like that. So I think it's going to be an interesting debate, because Quebec itself is going to highlight some things where it's going to be very hard for Mark Carney to, be able to talk out of both sides of his mouth. I think Pierre, needs to figure out a way to smile, relate to his family, something that I think has helped him in the polls. He's got two big demographics that he's challenged by. One is with women, and the other is with seniors over the age of 60.
Interesting. Yeah. So we're keeping an eye on the debate in the corner of the screen there. Oh, it just disappeared, but we will keep an eye. The debate is supposed to start at 6 p.m. This is kind of amusing that it was supposed to start at 7. That's what they originally announced. And then it turns out that there's a Habs game on right now. And so there was some outrage, and they were up in arms at the Block that how could we possibly compete with a hockey game? Come on, guys, it's Canada. So they've moved the debate an hour forward, which I appreciate, because I'm a morning person. My kids wake me up at the crack of dawn every day. And so usually by 8 o'clock, I'm my screens are off and I'm getting ready for bed. So I'm much happier doing a 6 p.m. show than one starting at 8 and then going all the way to midnight. But anyway, I want to pick up on that immigration question that you asked, because it is a different issue in Quebec than the rest of Canada. It seems like they're much more willing to be critical of immigration, and not just from an economic perspective. Pierre kind of plays it safe. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives play it safe, and they only focus on the economic side of things and the impact on housing and that kind of thing. Whereas in Quebec, you see more willingness to talk about Canadian values, Quebec values,
Absolutely.
and saying that newcomers must adhere to those. We did a poll here at Juno this week, and our Juno News poll just came out. One of the questions we asked this week, which we hadn't asked before, was support when it comes to immigration. So we described the three parties' policies without matching it to a policy, so that the person taking the poll wouldn't, identify necessarily with the position of the party they prefer. And so when it came to Mark Carney's position on immigration, which we presume is the Century Initiative, let's get to 100 million Canadians by the end of the century, which would mean about 1 million newcomers year after year. Only 5% of Canadians wanted that view. Whereas Pierre Poilievre's position, which is let's return back to Stephen Harper levels, a pledge that he made in his exclusive interview with Juno News, where he said that's the levels that he would bring it back down to, which was about 250,000 a year compared to the current levels, which are upwards of 400,000. So 57% of Canadians, you see that on the screen, support Pierre Poilievre's immigration plan without knowing that it was Pierre Poilievre's. So on the immigration issue, Conservatives, I think, need to really play hard on this issue. It is a tricky one, because you don't want to be perceived as being mean-spirited or xenophobic or whatever. However, I think if anything in Quebec, there is more of an appetite to hear the other side of the issue on immigration, which is that, let's question whether or not it's actually working for a country, and whether this is a path that we want to continue on. And I think that tonight is perhaps an opportunity. What do you think? Do you think it'll come up? Do you think it will play a role at all in this debate?
I think it has to. I think that if you look at several of these issues tie to immigration, obviously the question about identity, but the issue of housing ties to immigration, the issue of cost of living ties to immigration, the issue of employment ties to immigration. And in some cases, unfairly, people attribute, the current economic malaise, which has so much to do with liberal policies and not as much to do with immigration. But because the Liberals have failed so badly on controlling immigration, and they've allowed asylum fraud, they've allowed immigration fraud to run rampant. And that the interesting thing, I remember when this came up in the American polling, and one of the most fascinating poll numbers was that immigrant communities that had come in legally were the most opposed to illegal immigration and the most frustrated by the mistakes being made policy-wise on immigration. And I think you find the same thing here. If you talk to, one of my good friends who's a very strong conservative supporter who's Sikh, about what's happened within the Sikh community, within some of the fraudulent schools that are used, gangland issues, his point to me has been it's the Sikh community that's the most offended by the fact that these criminals aren't put away, that they openly defraud the immigration system, the asylum system, the welfare system to support criminal syndicate behavior, and sometimes even Khalistani terror networks, etc. And that is well known in the community, and they hate it, and they wish that there was a direct response to it and decent law enforcement and laws that were honored. And I think that Pierre actually has a very strong hand to play on this, because Canada was the example of a modern pluralistic Western society that was able to use immigration to buttress and build our economic momentum without allowing it to turn into the ghettoization of groups and the sort of violent unrest that you saw in parts of France, parts of Sweden, etc., where immigration had just happened on the basis of sort of compassion, but had been used by criminal syndicates to take advantage of these countries. The Liberals have lost control of that badly. And, when they've been challenged on it, they've made, they've sort of added insult to injury by making across the board changes to education policies, which, they simply needed to deal with immigration, not to destroy a bunch of kids that had actually come in on scholarships validly and were attending good schools. So I think there's something in that. The problem with so many of these issues is that they've been reduced.
I'm going to interrupt you, David. Just going to give an update on the bottom of our screen there. We see the leaders are already taking their place. The debate's not supposed to start for another 10 minutes. Perhaps this is just sort of to get us all pumped up and psyched about the debate, but it looks like the leaders are taking the stage. So don't worry, folks. We're going to monitor it. We're not going to talk over the debate. We're going to let you watch that in full. And then David and I will be back afterwards. And so, like I said, I think, the debate's going to be fun. It's going to be good. And I really have high hopes for the whole evening and what we're able to find out about Mark Carney. But I think that the most important part of the show will be the end, when the journalists get to ask questions, because they've allowed independent media in there. So we have Cian Bexty, we have Clayton Domain of True North, and Alex Olton, the three of them. And I said earlier, they've got like a game theory plan here. They are going to get a question in, and we are very excited about that. The Rebel is also there, and there's also other independent journalists. So I have high hopes about that. And then we're gonna join you at the end, and we're gonna do a post debate analysis and tell you what we thought were the highlights of the debate. And hopefully at that point we'll be able to get a call in from Cian Bexty or one of the other reporters to ask them about how it went from the inside. So just to give you a little preview of that, folks. And so, David, I haven't had you on my show so far during this election cycle. Just wondering quickly if you could tell me, like, what do you think the main theme of this campaign has been? I'll tell you, I think it has been the Chinese election interference. Even though that hasn't dominated the headlines, I think it's really shaken Mark Carney, and he's not quite had the ability to answer those questions. And it's sort of undermining his campaign. It's chipping away at his credibility. And the fact that he's not very likable, he's not very natural, he doesn't seem to like Canadians very much. That's all kind of coming up. But I wonder what you think are the main themes of the campaign, and then if you have any kind of predictions for the debate tonight.
Yeah, look, that's a big question. Maybe I'll start with the issue. I think that what defined the first half of this campaign and what defined the shift at the Liberal Party, the change of leadership at the top, was Donald Trump. And Trump's team has had three kind of overlapping mandates. One is to deal with the debt crisis in the United States, which is what's driven Doge. It's what's driven the repricing of $9.5 trillion of debt this year. That's behind a lot of the things that are going on in terms of what they're doing with tariffs. The other one is trade, and the third one is security. China is involved in all three of those themes. And China is the critical thing the United States has to deal with on all three of those: trade, manufacturing, nearshoring of critical minerals, dual use technologies, IP theft, what's happening in terms of strategic realignment on security, etc. Canada is actually caught between the China and United States dynamics right now in a very fundamental way, and in ways that we are not acknowledging openly or dealing with openly. And one of those is fentanyl. The Americans are well aware that our Port of Vancouver is completely penetrated by the Chinese triads, three big triads. They just had a huge super lab bust, another one up in BC. We've got this dogma in Canada that somehow this is all just a ruse and that we don't really have a drug problem, yet we've lost 50,000 kids to drug deaths in the last 10 years since the Liberals took over. 50,000 kids, Canadian kids, have died from opioid abuse. 93% of that has been fentanyl. And yet we're acting hurt by the fact that we're being told that we have a fentanyl problem because we've only captured 45 kilograms or whatever this completely bizarre myopic number is. The reason that we've only captured that is because we don't have the right law enforcement, we don't have the screening at our ports, etc. And Sam Cooper's done a phenomenal job of spelling out just how bad this has gotten. The other issue that we have, in addition to fentanyl, is we have a huge laundering operation. The Iranians are very involved with it. The Chinese are very involved with it. We've had absolutely no effectiveness on this. We've lost track of what's estimated to be 600 IRGC agents inside Canada since we named them a designated terror group in June of last year. The degree to which Canada has lost control of its own security is almost impossible to describe unless you go through a list of things. You're seeing it kind of come out now with these RCMP letters over the foreign influence of these 9 members that Carney has now re-enlisted in his current cabinet. But this party has a big problem with China because they got too close and the Chinese play for keeps, right? The Chinese are definitely operating secret police stations. They're definitely putting bounties on dissidents. They're definitely controlling the media. They're definitely working hard to have somebody that's pliant and weak and brittle like Mark Carney that they can manipulate. And I think what's happened is Mark Carney finds himself in a very tough place. He's been to China multiple times. I want to go on the record by saying I think we need to engage China. I think Chinese people are phenomenal. They're great at business. They've got a terrific economy. They work super hard. They're beating us on science, math, engineering, tech, right? The Chinese people are not the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party is a very small percentage of elites that have managed to take over and try and run the society. They're actually very brittle. They don't control a lot of what goes on. That economy proceeds on pretty capitalist terms in most parts of the country. And it's to our benefit and to the world's benefit that we have free and open trade. And I believe that what the Trump team is after is using the current trade war leverage to try and get to freer trade. That's certainly what they're trying to do with Canada. They've made that point multiple times. But I think to your point, the thing that has defined this election has been the Trump dynamic, and the Trump dynamic has played its way through because what they're really after is China. But they dealt first with their 2 closest, largest trading partners, Mexico and Canada, for a reason. And then they declared an overall trade tariff war on all fronts for a reason, which is because they knew China was repurposing multiple different ports of entry to access the US. And I think that Carney's ability to sort of run this bizarre elbows up theme much longer, I think that's getting old. I think people are starting to mock it now. I think he's running very close to the tape here. I think if this election was another 4 weeks, I'd actually predict we would be back in landslide territory.
Well, it should be, right? If Mark Carney was an honorable person, if he was doing the right thing, he wouldn't be trying to game the system to just maximize the odds of him winning. Like, that's not the way that that's not the spirit of our democracy, right? So like he's a new unknown, he's a caretaker prime minister at this point. He doesn't even have a seat in parliament. And so, if he was just a person who was guided by his moral compass, he would say, okay, I'm going to call for the longest election possible so that Canadians can really get to know me. I'm going to do as many debates as possible so that we can really discuss the ideas of our country, right? That's the spirit of democracy. But Mark Carney doesn't have those values. His values very much are globalist, elitist. They try to pretend that being part of the World Economic Forum is no big deal. It's not just that Mark Carney was part of the World Economic Forum. He kind of is the World Economic Forum. Like, he embodies it. He was the sort of person pushing hardest for net zero policies. And so I think his mindset is very much elitist. Like, I know what's best. I'm the responsible person. I will run things. I don't want to take any questions. And that's just sort of like how he sees the world. And that's why he put the shortest election possible and did the fewest amount of debates possible. And he put a lid on it, right? Like, he canceled his campaign. Anytime Trump is in the news, he'll use it as an excuse. So he's paused his campaign 3 times now to deal with Trump, because that's all that they want Canadians thinking about and talking about, because the more people are thinking talk about Trump, the better he resonates. Just for the audience, we are keeping an eye on the screen. I know it was a little confusing. The leaders came out. They started jotting down notes. It seemed like it was imminent. They were getting mic'd up. But then en français, they said that there was a 6-minute countdown. It's down to 2. So I promise as soon as this debate starts, we will throw to it. We're not going to talk over it. I have my producer here telling me that they gave a 2-minute warning. So I promise we will go back to that. But I guess just final question here before we go to the debate, David. What do you think of the polls? Because you said that we would be back in landslide territory. So I'm guessing that you've been following along. That Pierre Poilievre was up at 45, then he dipped as low as like 30, and now it looks like he's edging up. Our Juno News poll today had him at 37, with the Liberals and Carney at 39, so neck and neck. I think it's close. I don't fully trust the polls. I think they're probably off by 2 or 3 points. Obviously, they're capturing some kind of mood. Like, I don't think it's going to be a conservative landslide, but I do think that they're off. What do you think?
Yeah, look, polls. I did a lot of polling. I did my PhD and involved very heavily with polling. Polls model the selection of the different demographic cohorts based on what happened last time, in part. And I don't know that that's going to be as good a guide to this group. I think people are very motivated, and I think they're probably oversampling the over 60s by a few points, and that would give Carney a few points. The Main Street poll most recently just had Pierre ahead by a point, which was interesting. So I think we have a dead heat. I don't know about the efficiency. The Conservatives always beat the Liberals by in numbers, but we haven't beat them in the efficiency of the seat distribution. And so I think we need to really have a breakthrough, and one of the big breakthroughs will be what happens tonight. If Quebec starts to, lose their love of Mark Carney, and the fact that his French is bad could contribute to that, we could see a bit more of a vote split in Quebec. And if we see that, we could see some momentum in the Conservative direction.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you here, David, but it looks like they are live here. So we'll go to the debate, and stick with us, folks, because we're going to have our analysis at the end. So enjoy, and we'll be back again. Thanks for joining us, and thank you to the super chats. Farm Girl also gave us $25. Really appreciate it. Okay, we'll go to the other feed, and then we will be back.
Ever. The U.S. threat is huge, but there are other issues at stake. We choose Quebec. Donald Trump has attacked our country. We have to defend our workers. Live from Maison Radio-Canada in Montreal, this is the Leaders' Debate 2025 with Patrice Roy. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the French Leaders' Debate. We are joined by Mark Carney, leader of the Liberal Party, Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party, Yves-François Blanchet, leader of the Bloc Québécois, and Jagmeet Singh, leader of the New Democratic Party. Good evening to all 4 of you.
Good evening.
Thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, it's 6 p.m. in a few seconds? This important event has been moved forward to give as many people as possible the opportunity to tune in without missing a decisive moment for another one of our passions, hockey. And by the way, I'll go off script here for a few seconds and say that the Montreal Canadiens, you'd better win. I also would like to say that the leaders' invitations were managed by the Leaders' Debates Commission, and the podium places on the set were designated at random. But the questions, subjects, and editorial choices are ours. I'll be managing speaking time fairly, within a fair limit. There are 5 themes tonight. Obviously, the trade war with the United States, the cost of living, energy and climate, immigration and foreign affairs, and finally, identity and sovereignty. And I'll also have a few rapid-fire questions at the end of the debate. This debate is your debate this evening. You will be free to speak as much as possible. The only rule that I ask of you is not to speak at the same time. If you start talking over one another, I'll ask Pascal, our sound engineer, to turn off your mics. So let the debate begin, or I was going to say good game. So we'll move on to our first opening question. You'll have 45 seconds each to answer. This election, according to many, has been hijacked by Trump. So to assert our sovereignty early in this debate, I'll ask you to name 2 things you'd put forward, concrete things that will change the lives of Canadians, but that have nothing to do with the United States. 45 seconds. Mr. Carney, you're first.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Mr. Leroy. And I'd like to thank everyone watching at home for joining us tonight. And I'd like to thank the other leaders for your service to Canada. 2 things that don't include Mr. Trump. First of all, we need to double the rhythm of construction of new homes here in Canada. That's absolutely fundamental. And the second thing, we need to promote and strengthen our cultural institutions in Canada.
45 seconds, Mr. Poilievre. 2 things that you would promise Canadians to change their lives that have nothing to do with the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Roy, and thanks to my colleagues for being here today. Clearly, life is no longer affordable. The promise of an affordable life is broken. I have a plan to make life more affordable by cutting taxes by 15%. That's one thing that will reward work for the middle class and for seniors who've already worked. Second thing, we're going to scrap the GST on new houses, and we're going to incentivize cities to reduce their taxes too, so that our young people can save up to $100,000 on a new home and restore the promise of Canada.
Mr. Blanchet.
I would like to come back to something that I do all year long. First of all, thank you for having welcomed us. I have been waiting for this moment for a long time. I would like to insist on 2 things for Quebec that I was talking about before the Trump crisis is Quebec's right to have a different and open economy, open to the world, based on its own natural resources, on its own attachment to a green economy, but also Quebec's right to be different, to have a different language, to have a different culture, to have different values, to have different immigration models that need to succeed. These are elements that should always have been mentioned, but that have a particularly new sense with this new crisis.
Great. Mr. Singh, 45 seconds. 2 things that have nothing to do with the American.
Thank you for the question. Good evening, everybody. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about values. What are the values that underpin the answer to this question? Canadians and Quebecers like taking care of one another. We come together. That is what we believe in. That is a basic value for us. And this value is embodied in our public health care system, which has nothing to do with the U.S. And we want our healthcare system to be nothing like the American one. We will expand pharmacare so that everyone can access the medications they need. And I also want to talk about dental care. I also want to expand that program, which owes itself to us.
Thank you. I'd like to reassure you, Mr. Singh. I think you were disappointed. We are going to talk about health as well, and I'll ask questions about that later. First theme, therefore, obviously, the trade war. Trump is going to be tough. We don't know what's in store with him. I don't think any solution is going to be possible. We always thought they were our ally. It doesn't make sense. You can't reason with him. The government will have to stand firm, stay firm. We have to put him in his place. Otherwise, he'll destroy us totally. The answer should be pragmatic. It would be good to pause some of our services to the U.S. They need us. An eye for an eye, no messing around. Get us out of this mess. We need a leader who can make decisions to destabilize Trump and make him respect Canada. What does he plan to do with the new president of the United States? What do you plan to do with this president? That is the elephant in the room. So for your information, there are 1,073 days left in Donald Trump's term. Why do you think that you are the best person here tonight to negotiate with Mr. Trump? Mr. Poilievre, 35 seconds.
First of all, We will never be an American state. We will remain sovereign. On my first day as Prime Minister, I will restart negotiations to accelerate a deal that will put an end to the tariffs and protect our sovereignty. We can't control Trump, but at the same time, we have to control what we can control. We need to reverse liberal economic policies that have weakened our country. We need to unleash our resources, cut taxes, and bring jobs back home so that we can face Trump from a position of strength.
All right, well, first of all, in a crisis, you have to plan for the worst possible situation, and you have to have a plan to build a strong economy here in Canada. And we need to react with strength, and those are the elements that will allow us to succeed with Mr. Trump. He respects strength. He respects people who understand how the world works and who understand how the private sector works. And Canada needs to create other options, new, reliable partnerships around the world, and that's what I'll do.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. Mr. Blanchet.
Mr. Trump will hang from his own noose because their economy is dependent on ours. But there will be a lot of harm done to Canada, to Europe, to Mexico before then. We have to realize that our joint GDP is bigger than the States. Our population is bigger than the States. And so retaliation is going to hurt the States, but we have to negotiate in a rational way, and we shouldn't fall to fear, and we shouldn't spin fear for political reasons.
Conclusions?
It's all about priorities. For me, now is the time to invest, not cut. It is the time to protect what we hold dear, our farmers, our culture, the French language. These things should not be sacrificed. It is time to defend who we are, what our values are. And we believe in helping one another. That's what we will do. How? We will strengthen our healthcare system. We will not let it be Americanized. That is crucial. We must defend who we are.
So, open debate to begin now for about 15 minutes. Mr. Poilievre, you have called Carney a political grifter, a globalist banker who's disconnected from reality. And Mr. Carney, you've said Pierre Poilievre is a career politician who knows nothing about how the real world works. So I ask you the question, which of you first is capable of standing up to Donald Trump? Mr. Poilievre.
I am, because I'm going to put Canada first. I will never compromise Canada's interests, and I will control what we can control here. Obviously, no one will be able to control the decisions of Donald Trump, but we can control our economy, our domestic economy, by overturning liberal economic policies that have weakened our country and made us more dependent on the Americans.
The issue is, Mr. Poilievre,
Well,
you would make Canada more like the
That's not
United
true.
States. You would Americanize our healthcare system,
That's not true.
privatize it. Everyone knows that's what conservatives do.
That's not
Mr.
true.
Carney, you said that you're better?
All right. First of all, I know how to negotiate. And I agree with Mr. Singh. We need to start by saying what's never going to be on the table. The French language, Quebec's culture, and supply management will never be on the table. Our resources, that's the first thing. Second, in terms of Mr. Blanchet's point, the opportunities that we have with the European Union are there, and I've already started building new relationships with the European Union. As Prime Minister, I met with the President of France and with the President of the European Commission.
There's a lot to unpack in there, let's be honest. And perhaps it's right. You say that you're an expert in managing a crisis, but you say you're a negotiator, but, well, perhaps negotiating with tax havens. But when it comes to trade agreements, I haven't seen the proof. We apparently have to believe you with no political experience. And so I find this kind of funny because people say we have to unite and work together. On the one hand, you have never spoken to me before this evening. you're not trying to figure out how to collaborate between equals, Quebec, Canada, Mexico, European partners. You're trying to score divisive points that only serves the United States of America.
All right. I've just started as Prime Minister. I've been Prime Minister for a month. In the first week, I signed an agreement with the premiers of all the provinces, the Premier of Quebec and the premiers of all the provinces and territories concerning free trade within Canada. It's also an agreement that deals with trade corridors. That's an example. That's an example.
You haven't sat with any premiers. You've sat with MPs that will be elected at the same level as you if you're elected.
The problem, Mr. Carney, is that your party has been in power for 10 years. And in that time, it's not meetings that are going to change things. It's your policies that have blocked resources. C-69, which blocks not just pipelines, but also dams, mines, and liquid natural gas exploration. We have a deal with Europe, a trade deal. The Conservatives negotiated it, but Liberal legislation has prevented development, and you continue to support those laws. Those laws need to be repealed and replaced with laws that will unleash our resources and allow us to export abroad and allow us to become truly economically and
talk about that later.
Sovereign and
In a war,
have
you need
energy
to determine
sovereignty
your
as well.
priorities. Mr. Carney, unfortunately, your priority is, well, you had time to meet with the king, but you did not increase the amount of money people receive when they lose their jobs due to the trade war. These days, people receiving EI get maybe half of their salary. For people who have already lost their jobs, that is not enough. It won't cover the bills. It won't cover their rent costs. That shows your priorities. For me, workers are number one. We need a system to support our workers.
We'll hear some in a few seconds, but Mr. Carney, response, and then I have another question for Blanchet.
Well, first of all, we need to fight in a trade war. We need to fight with counter tariffs. And all the money collected from our counter tariffs will go directly to workers and the businesses that are the most affected by this trade war. They won't be used for tax cuts the way that Mr. Poilievre is going to do.
You always want to increase them. You're liberal. We want to cut taxes.
Started as Prime Minister
For a fourth Liberal term.
I've just started.
You were Justin Trudeau's economic advisor. Have you forgotten that?
Honestly, let me cut in here. Both of them would cut taxes for billionaires and millionaires. They have already done it in the past. Your first step was to reduce taxes for the millionaires. Pierre Poilievre would do the same thing.
That's not true.
You're not thinking of regular people.
We've cut the consumer carbon tax. That's what we
Mr. Singh,
did.
Mr. Blanchet, we've been telling Canadians for several days that it would be better to have a minority government. You said it clearly. With Trump, can Canadians not want a majority government that's stronger?
I don't know where that reasoning comes. The minority government would be weaker than a majority government. Go tell that to the Germans, who have only governed through coalitions recently. Many countries have coalitions, and if that is the population of the people, then great. At this point, it's possible that Canadians and Quebecers, perhaps, choose to trust in someone who has the least experience in politics. Quebec has a different economy, different interests, different everything. We want a parliament where our economic difference is taken into account.
Let's talk a little bit about
Mr. Singh,
minority
in terms of the minority
governments.
government,
The whole point of a minority government is to help people, to make a difference in people's lives. But honestly, Mr. Blanchet, unfortunately, in the last minority government, you showed that you were as useless as the monarchy is. You did nothing for people. What is worse, you voted against measures that would help Quebecers. Dental care, pharmacare, These are measures that have helped hundreds of thousands of Quebecers.
Quebec jurisdiction, dental
Exactly.
care, health care,
People in Quebec,
pharmacare,
people
money
in
that we
Quebec,
send to Ottawa. Ottawa does not have the expertise or the jurisdiction.
we are
Quebec
paying their
does.
bills.
Mr. Roy,
Please let me finish one sentence.
Please wrap it up.
When we want to be effective, we give the money to the experts, those who have the legal jurisdiction to spend the money, and that is Quebec in this case. The NDP gave $2 billion to a
We are
insurance company.
giving
Everything was
money to our
going
Quebec seniors.
fine until now, but Mr. Carney, in terms of the minority government,
Mr. Roy, we are in a crisis, the most serious crisis of our lives. We need to react with resounding, overwhelming strength. Yes, we need to cut a few taxes. Yes, we need to cut bureaucracy. But the government needs to act in a time of crisis. So we need to have a government ready to act.
But when you were Justin Trudeau's economic advisor, you weakened our economy. We need economic sovereignty, and that means bringing back production to Canada. And I would reverse liberal policies around development. I would expedite construction permits. We would have pre-approved permits. And that would, and I would also make sure that we could send our energy to Europe to break Europeans' dependence on Putin, and to break our dependence on the
The
U.S.
Conservatives and the Liberals both prioritize the ultra-rich, not you, not
Great,
regular
we do
Canadians.
have a segment on that.
That's the difference.
We have a segment on energy and pipelines, so we'll come back to that later. There are people who are watching us who are concerned. There will be negotiations with the Americans, obviously. Well, you'll all say supply management here, but I'd like to say that Canada gave up market shares during the last 3 trade deal negotiations. We're talking about more than $450 million a year in losses for Canadian farmers. So what is something you wouldn't concede in a
I will
negotiation?
defend supply management. I will defend the French language. I will defend our healthcare system. I will defend our decisions and our laws. We will always be sovereign. And the way we're going to restore that sovereignty, Canadian sovereignty, is by making our economy stronger. We need to cut red tape by 25% for businesses. We need to reduce development charges, taxes on housing. We need to support labor and energy and domestic production. That's how we can be more sovereign.
Supply management. Well, I'll go around the table, Mr. Carney.
In the face of the U.S.
It's nice to say supply management, but we've said it 3 times and it hasn't been done. So,
Well, this is the first time that I will be at the table if I am elected as Prime Minister. I've said a number of times, and since the beginning of my campaign in Mauricie, we'll never touch supply management. We won't put Quebec culture or the French language on the table. And I think we all agree on that point. And that's important. We have to be very clear from the beginning when talking to the Americans.
One area that we don't agree on is that Pierre Poilievre would cut our healthcare system. You said it, everyone knows it. You said that you want to cut. You would cut dental care.
Not true.
Pharmacare. You called them bad ideas. And unfortunately, Mr. Carney's plan to budget the operating budget in 3 years
Mr. Singh,
would lead to $43 billion
we'll talk about
worth
that in
of
the next
cuts.
segment. Cost of living, we'll talk about tax cuts later and choices, and we will underscore that none of you has tabled a costed plan. These are just promises. Mr. Blanchet on supply
We have
management.
tabled a program, first of all. Second of all, we are not the ones who decide what's on the table. If Mr. Trump says, I want to talk about this, no one will be able to stop him from at least talking about it. We've never sacrificed the principle of supply management. So it's empty words. Little bits have been sacrificed every single time at a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars every single time. All Mr. Trump wants is a wave of Wisconsin milk with hormones, with no protection against antibiotics.
So what would you do concretely?
We will bring back an act that everyone approved. The Liberals before Carney approved it. Everyone had approved it, but then there were certain intrigues with unelected senators. There's a number of unelected members of Parliament that seem to be making decisions.
What would protect better?
Well, maybe I agree with that law, but my point is that we need to invest in Canada. Our plan, which will be unveiled this weekend, will catalyze $500 billion of investment in Canada over the next 5 years. And that will be important in our negotiations with Mr. Trump.
I'd like us to listen to a worker together from Stellantis. For him, this crisis with the U.S. is very clear. He's just lost his job.
I was laid off by Stellantis because of the trade war with the U.S. How will your government stop Mr. Trump from attacking our industries one by one? And how will you protect our jobs? Concrete measures. How will you help workers? You all have different proposals. Mr. Poilievre.
First of all, I already announced a fund to help companies keep jobs, to keep workers in their jobs, because the priority of workers is to keep working. Secondly, there will be EI to protect people who have fallen on rough times. I will be there for people who've lost their jobs. At the same time, we need to stimulate investment to strengthen our economy and to encourage new companies. We need to unleash our natural resources, and we need to create more jobs in resource industries. We also want to create more jobs for tradespeople at a time when they need work to build new houses.
Let's stay on workers. Mr. Singh.
If a business wants to sell cars in Canada, they should be required to have a factory in Canada, a presence in Canada, and I would put this in a law. We are a major market. If you want to sell here, you should create jobs here. And let me add, the first thing Mr. Poilievre said in 2022 when he became Conservative leader is that he would cut EI contributions. So it is not credible that he would increase support to people when he talked about eliminating contributions.
Mr. Blanchet, for workers, you've said you want to go back to a pandemic-style wage subsidy.
The principle of that. We said that even before the campaign. To paraphrase Mr. Poilievre, EI is fairly broken. People have difficulty accessing it, and I disagree with Mr. Carney's suggestion to say that money will be invested in training. You've lost your job, but we're going to train you, and you're going to have another kick at a can at the age of 55. Not a good idea. The idea of the wage subsidy was to allow the worker to have a link to their job by giving them a subsidy so that the employer, should they want to, could rehire them someone who had the skill to do the job. So there would be a transitional period where there could be temporary job losses, like for the case we've just heard.
Well, first of all, three things. All the money from our counter tariffs will go directly to workers. Second, we have a strategic fund for manufacturing in Canada, specifically for the auto sector. And third, our counter-tariff system for the automotive sector contains an incentive of $7 billion for the automakers to keep production and workers here in Canada. That's very important. But the reason that we've done all of this is so that we can have strong positions to negotiate with Trump.
Just to conclude, I think we need to encourage Canadians to buy Canadian-made cars. And that's why, as long as there are tariffs, we will scrap the GST on cars and trucks that are built here, mainly built here in Canada.
Good, because my next
I think the tariff is a good idea. What allows companies to buy and sell more, then yes, I do agree with that approach.
70%.
Mr. Poilievre copied our idea. We announced the GST lifting for Canadian-made cars before him.
Now, there are a lot of things that are in all of your platforms, but we'll come back to that. Now, 70% of Canadians say that they're buying fewer American products. It's a big number. You leaders, could you please name me one made-in-USA product that you no longer buy?
I buy my own strawberries.
So you don't buy strawberries
I
anymore?
buy Quebec strawberries, and I do my own shopping, by the way.
What products have you not bought,
Well,
Mr. Carney?
No more wine, no more alcohol, no more American alcohol.
I do my own shopping, and I cook at home. Lots of products. Fruits, there's a lot of Canadian apples.
So you're making an effort.
Yes, I'm making an effort with apples, other fruit, strawberries.
Strawberries. Everyone is eating a lot of strawberries these days.
I bring it up because I do my own grocery
I'm in a
shopping,
different
which
position.
Carney does not.
This is a delicious conversation. It's beef in my case. I buy Canadian beef. It's the best beef in the world. But I never buy American strawberries either.
Organic beef from Quebec
Next
is also
theme.
not bad.
Well, let's share some of that
All
someday.
right. It's very beautiful to see. Our next theme is the cost of living. He can manage our money. Oh, we're having a hard time here. I hope they'll be able to balance the budget and maintain the same quality of services. Inflation, lower taxes. I earn a good salary, but it's hard to pay for groceries, for childcare for our kid, for everything. Education is expensive. Prices keep going up. The middle class is hurting. And for the poor, it's worse. We're retired and we're counting every penny. We're getting poorer. I feel like no one really listens to young people on housing or the cost of living. So what does the future hold for us young people? What does the future hold for young people? I'll give you a few figures here very briefly. I'm sure this won't come as a surprise, but in Montreal, housing prices have more than doubled over 10 years, from over $300,000 to $671,000. Remarkable growth in Toronto and Vancouver as well. So my question, and you'll have 35 seconds, first of all, how can we improve access to housing, for example, for this young woman that we just heard from, Mr. Blanchet?
Clearly, it's through the starting capital and another GST-based policy. There needs to be access to capital for their down payment. My children can't pay for a house. A lot of them have jobs, good jobs. It's essential that we give them a little boost using public money, for example. And it's not during a crisis and that in cutting budgets that we will be able to do so. We need to reduce speculation on house prices. We need to invest in affordable housing, social housing, student housing to give a good price and reduce pressure
Thank you, Mr.
in
Blanchet.
the
Mr. Poilievre,
residences of
35
Canada.
seconds.
I'm with you, with all those who are having a hard time affording their groceries, or young people who can't buy a house. After a decade of liberal inflation, liberal policies have increased the cost of living the most in 40 years. I will cut your taxes for the average worker by 15%. We will scrap the GST on new homes, and we will incentivize municipalities to speed up permits and construction so that young people can once again buy a home and restore the dream of home ownership.
In order to fix this crisis in the cost of living, we need to make sure that Canadians have more money in their pockets, and they need to have more Canada in their pockets. So that means a tax cut for the middle class. And our plan is almost $800 per family. Cut the GST on first homes and increase competition. And in Canada, we have dental care, pharmacare, and daycares. We need to protect that, and we need to double new housing construction in Canada with our plan.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Singh.
Thank you. When I talk to people and the cost of living comes up, there are two main topics. First, grocery costs. Second, housing costs. For groceries, major grocery giants are gouging us. We saw this with the price of bread, the price of meat. They drive prices up, and they are gouging the Canadian public. We would put price caps on essential groceries. We would also stop corporate landlords from buying up affordable housing and apartments. We are in it for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Singh. 245,000 housing units were built in 2024. You've all promised to massively accelerate the pace of that construction. The Liberals have said 500,000, the NDP 600,000. Mr. Singh, you're going to start this part of the open debate. Do houses grow on trees?
We have a clear plan for how to make this happen. First, we would not sell off our federal land. We would keep it, and we would build affordable housing on it, 100% affordable. We would train Canadian workers to build more homes. We also must keep the affordable housing that we do have, and unfortunately, the two major parties have let rich speculators buy up affordable housing. And now we have no more. That's a major issue. We need to keep our affordable housing and build more housing in general.
A couple of ideas. First of all, I would like to talk for Quebec. There are delays of hundreds of thousands of houses to be built, and we don't have the human resources to do so. But there are initiatives for small housing, for social housing, modular housing, that would allow us to build quicker with fewer resources and cheaper to accommodate as many people as possible. But I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's financial framework, because the Conservatives want to cut. They're going to have to cut spending at some point as well. The Liberals want to cut in revenue but increase expenditure. There's some financial magic that's in there somewhere. I would like to hear their financial framework or even their electoral platforms.
In a minute,
that would be
the
nice.
Constant plan. But Mr. Carney, 500,000 housing units.
And we need to get started so that we can get the housing market working better with a reduction in bureaucracy at the municipal level and in fees. But we are proposing a new institution, Build Canada Homes, which is going to build affordable homes using lumber from Quebec, using lumber from British Columbia, using Canadian wood, and using new Canadian technologies. We are going to create a new industry.
It seems to me, you say 500,000 units? I mean, I could say 800,000, 400,000. Where's this coming from?
You know, if I can have 35 seconds, we need to add funding of $25 billion for the development of affordable homes and $10 billion for...
Mr. Poilievre, you haven't costed your objective.
Yes, we will. In our platform, which is going to come out in a few days. But Mr. Carney, you're repeating exactly the same promises that Justin Trudeau has been making for 10 years. During the Liberal decade, when you were the economic advisor, the cost of housing has gone up.
England,
and you inflated the cost of housing then, too. You have a terrible record in England for real estate costs there, real estate prices. The problem is that the Liberals want to build bureaucracy. They want to balloon bureaucracy by creating new departments, new bureaucrats. We don't need more bureaucrats. We need more homes, more new doors on new homes for young families. The reason why housing has become so expensive today is because of taxes and bureaucracy. I will eliminate the GST on new homes. I will incentivize cities to free up land and accelerate permits so that we can build your home.
Mr. Singh, then Mr. Carney.
Let us talk records. Mr. Poilievre Poilievre, you were
Yes,
a housing
absolutely.
minister. How many homes did you build?
Over 200,000.
I'll tell you, 6. You built 6 homes.
200,000.
6.
200,000.
We cannot believe what
you
you're
asked
saying.
a question. Can I answer
We cannot
it?
believe Mr. Poilievre. He only built 6 homes
200,000.
when he was in power.
Can I answer?
We know the answer.
Can
It's
I
6.
answer? It was 200,000 that year, and the cost of the average home was $450,000. So thanks very much for reminding everyone of my record. It was a good record.
During the 10 years the Conservatives were in power, rent doubled, housing costs doubled. And then, when the Liberals came in, they doubled again. Unfortunately, Mr. Carney benefited from the housing crisis when he was the board chair at Brookfield Investments. His company benefited from the housing crisis by buying up affordable buildings and tripling rents.
Mr. Carney.
Okay, Mr. Poilievre's approach is everyone for themselves. In the COVID crisis, he said, okay, let's cut taxes, let's cut bureaucracy. This crisis, now that we're facing the greatest crisis of our lives, he's saying, cut taxes, cut bureaucracy. In a crisis, you have to do that to a certain point, but you have to act as a government. And if I may, you need to have capital to catalyze investment. And with a small amount of catalyzing investment from the Government of Canada, we can create huge private investment and a new Canadian industry.
All right, Mr. Blanchet, then Mr. Poilievre.
Another proposal that I find interesting is to allow parents who have money in savings for their retirement to take the money temporarily to help for their kids' down payment. That's not $500 billion that will be required. These are not civil servants that will be fired. This is a logical decision made by parents like myself who want to help their kids without money from the state, with a tax measure that helps retirees who want to help their children. Would that not be more concrete than programs after programs that are just empty words and for which there's no financial framework?
Yeah, I'll come back to that in a minute, but let's let Mr. Poilievre conclude because you were having a conversation with Mr. Carney.
Mr. Carney, in 2020 and 2021, you said that inflation wouldn't happen and that it would have been a good thing if it did. You were quoted in the media and you even advised Justin Trudeau to print money, and that's what caused our inflationary crisis. You're just like Justin Trudeau. You have exactly the same policies, the same approach. We need change. And you, Mr. Carney, you do not embody change.
You represent the ultra-rich.
Mr. Poilievre is not Justin Trudeau. I'm not Justin Trudeau either, okay? In this election, the question is, who is going to succeed? Who is going to face Mr. Trump?
Same parties, same ministers, same caucus, same ideology, same hostility against Quebec. It's not just because the leader changes that the philosophy will magically change overnight.
You are all proposing, or just about all of you are proposing tax cuts. We'll see them up on the screen here. Mr. Carney announced that on the first day of the campaign. Mr. Poilievre's been announcing them for a long time. So for a couple earning $90,000 a year, you can see the numbers up here: $1,299 in savings for the Conservatives, $1,011 for the NDP, $577 for the Liberals. And the cost of those measures is really what I want to underline here. Mr. Poilievre, you're spending more on tax cuts than the NDP or Liberals. Now, you've all arrived here this evening with no costed financial plan. It's been a long time since we've seen that at the time of the leaders' debate, the leaders don't have a costed plan. So we don't know how you're going to pay for these tax cuts. Now, I'm going to be careful how I word this, but don't you think it's irresponsible to Canadian voters to do this? Mr. Carney, you said you've got the numbers, but where's your costed plan?
As I've just said, we'll be presenting our costed platform this weekend.
But why not earlier at an event?
There are 10 days left in the election campaign. It's about the same thing as Mr. Poilievre, as I've seen. And it is going to be costed, and the operational budget will be cleaned up. We'll balance it in 3 years, but at the same time, we will be investing in Canada and in Canadians.
Mr. Poilievre, where would you make the cuts? This comes back to my earlier question to Mr. Carney. In terms of the costed plans, what do you have to hide? Will transfers to provinces go down, for example?
We're going to cut consultants. Believe it or not, a Canadian family is spending $1,400 in federal tax just to pay for consultants. That's been a 100% increase. I'm going to cut consultants. Secondly, we're going to cut the cost of bureaucracy through attrition. People will be retiring, and we don't need to replace all of them. We can slowly, gradually reduce the cost of the bureaucracy. Third, we're going to pass a dollar for dollar bill. For every new dollar in spending, there will have to be a dollar in reduced spending. And we are going to generate $70 billion more in revenues.
And Mr. Carney don't have a costed plan that we've seen.
We are the only party that has talked about ways to increase government revenues. We have talked about closing tax loopholes, getting rid of tax havens, empowering the CRA to go after corporations that are not paying their taxes. These are not tax increases. These are taxes that are already supposed to be paid. The CRA has said that tens of billions of dollars in revenues are being lost. Pierre Poilievre has been very honest with Canadians. He will cut healthcare.
Not true. No,
he will
not true.
cut
That's false.
EI. He said
That's
this back
false.
in 2022 when he became leader of the Conservative Party.
That's false.
And Mark Carney has also said very clearly that he would make massive cuts.
No.
He would cut $43 billion worth
For the
of
first
spending.
time.
Mr. Carney, then Mr. Blanchet.
No, that's not right at all. I've said there is an operational budget that's over $200 billion a year. And that budget has grown 9% year over year over the last 10 years. We need to slow down that growth. And we'll do that with technology. We'll do that with attrition, as Mr. Poilievre has suggested. And we can do that, and we will do that. And it's necessary. But we're not going to cut transfers to individuals, nor transfers to the provinces.
So the provinces will not get less money. Mr. Blanchet, is that what you believe?
Well, I've an issue with this. These are Harry Potter financial frameworks. You need a lot of magic to make it work. There needs to be more money, but we're going to do cuts. They want to be more conservative than the Conservatives. Basic economics state that when there's a threat of recession or slowdown, that is when the state, well, that's why we're not saying cut taxes. We're saying make good investments. We want to invest in our military forces. It's the time to do so with Canadian companies, the Quebec tramway that Mr. Poilievre doesn't want to do. That's what we have to do. We have to have targeted investments, health transfers so that the Maisonneuve-Rosemont hospital can be renovated. It's time to invest in infrastructure, public infrastructure with public money so that everyone can keep their jobs.
So no tax cuts.
No, it wouldn't be a tax cut. There would be a specific budget for it.
It's necessary.
We have to keep going. They want to do one thing and the other. Cut, but somehow make more money. Something doesn't work.
We've started with the cost of living. We have to cut taxes for the cost of living.
What Mr. Blanchet said is true. You are talking about a magic spell here, Mr. Carney. This is one rare moment where we agree. On February 16th, you sat down with Rosemary Barton and you said that you would cut spending in the operational budget.
Operational spending. That's different.
You said,
one at a time, please,
that this would affect transfers for
No.
healthcare and to
No,
individuals.
Mr. Roy, no.
I have a question.
That's not right at all. That's not right at all.
Please, Mr. Carney, you'll have the opportunity to answer later. The question that people are asking themselves, and you may have heard this, Mr. Singh, you've promised that every Canadian will have a family doctor, that there will be vastly more nurses. Does the federal government need to continue developing more national plans like pharmacare and dental care? Or option two, should they be giving more money to the provinces for healthcare? Mr. Carney, you'll start off. More programs or more money?
First
for
of all,
programs?
the priority for the federal government is to invest and to catalyze investment in the most serious crisis we're facing in our lives. We need to catalyze private investment in our economy to create new and good jobs. That's the first thing we need to do. In terms of transfers to provinces for healthcare, yes, there are limits to the federal government's activity. No new programs. No.
Mr. Blanchet?
It's easy. All premiers from the provinces and territories unanimously asked for a 35% health transfer. I would like to re-explain it. The federal government receives more money than it needs. It needs $10, it gets $12. Quebec needs $10, but it only gets $8. So the federal government could take its surplus and say, I would like to invest in your jurisdictions. The Liberals and the Conservatives agree on this, and the NDP loves butting its nose into provincial jurisdiction. The Constitution sets out jurisdictions. The easiest way is to give the money without conditions.
You've said that we do need to step in, that we need to have more programs like this.
Let me explain. Absolutely, we need to increase health transfers, absolutely, in order to help out the provinces. What is more, we are now in the midst of a crisis, a healthcare crisis. It is being felt here in Quebec and all throughout the country. We should recognize that a leader is someone who looks for solutions, not excuses. I believe that we should be investing more in fixing problems. And yes, we can work with the provinces to hire more healthcare workers. We can work with them to get through this crisis. Pharmacare is one area where everyone can come together to bring down the cost of medication. We believe in helping people.
Deciding Quebec's priorities isn't your jurisdiction. I don't go to your house and tell you how to paint your wall, do I? It's money that you would refuse to give Quebec.
We can do two things at once. We can transfer money and then work with the provinces on other solutions.
Mr. Poilievre, more money to the provinces or more federal programs?
I think the federal government is taking too much tax revenues and delivering too little. And that's the Liberal track record after 10 years. And the question for Canadians is, you can't afford your groceries and you can't afford your rent or your housing because it's too expensive now after 3 terms of Liberal government. Will a 4th Liberal term change things for you enough for you to be able to buy a house and have a beautiful life?
Okay. For the health program, I didn't understand.
On healthcare, no. What I propose on that is a program that the federal government could coordinate, and that is to do with licenses for doctors and nurses. It would be a voluntary program, as has previously existed, to allow immigrants to be licensed and be able to work in our hospitals to reduce your wait times.
So everyone agrees on health transfer. The question is, the 13 premiers of the 13 economies of Canada. Canada doesn't have one economy, it has 13 economies. These requests were made to stop the deterioration of the healthcare system.
Next theme. Energy and climate.
The carbon tax was something that was supposed to help the environment, but now, what are we doing for the environment? It worries me a bit. Our planet is starting to die. I really want to see someone who can prioritize climate change and the economy in Canada. We shouldn't be building a pipeline. The environmental consequences are very serious. Even if for ecological reasons it's not the best solution. Well, I think we have to think about it. There was a good project in place, but then it was dropped. A pipeline would have a major impact. We may have to make sacrifices if we want to be more independent. Drill, baby, drill, says Donald Trump. But I have a very simple question for you, and I would like just a simple answer as well. You have 35 seconds open debate. Do you want Canada to increase oil production? Yes or no? Mr. Singh.
I would be in favor of investing in clean energy, renewable energy. With our public money, I would spend on projects like an east-west clean energy grid. That's the sort of thing we need. We need renewable energy for our future. That is where we should invest our public funds.
So, more or less oil, or the same amount as right now? You want to increase it? That's what people want to know. Are you increasing oil production?
There are a few measures that I support. Investing in clean energy. Bringing down our emissions.
We'll get to that in the open debate later. But the question is very simple, I think. Mr. Carney.
Yes, more oil so that we can reduce our imports, especially our imports from the United States, a country that is threatening us right now. But in order to do that, we need to have low-risk oil. Canada is a low-risk country, and low-cost oil. Canada's more or less that right now, but we also need low-carbon oil because we need to be competitive over the long term. So at the same time, we need to have pipelines. We need to invest in carbon stockage, carbon capture as well. That's very important for our competitiveness.
To that later, Mr. Poilievre, should we produce more oil in Canada?
Yes. And we have to be able to get it to market by pipeline. Unfortunately, the other parties passed an unconstitutional law, C-69, which is a no more pipelines bill, and that's why Canadians and Quebecers now have to buy 139,000 barrels of U.S. oil every day. I will repeal C-69 to allow for the construction of hydroelectric projects, mines, and also pipelines so that we can get around Donald Trump and be sovereign when it comes to energy.
There's a competition as to who will be the biggest oil head here. The Americans buy our oil, we buy their oil, because that's how geography works. I want less oil, but let us be clear. The one that approved 9B for Enbridge was me when I was the Environment Minister, but I say that we have to progressively wean off of petrol and oil because the cost on families will be far worse than what Mr. Poilievre says. Paying for the consequences of climate change will cost billions of dollars every single year per family. Let us invest in Quebec's green energy.
I'd like to ask a question to launch the debate. Mr. Carney, for 17 years now, the Liberals have been telling us that the only way to fight against climate change is to put a price on carbon with the carbon tax. There were elections on this. But the first day you came to power, you abolished this tax. What should Canadians understand from this? Is the fight against climate change no longer a priority for Liberals?
Not at all. It is still a priority, and it's a priority for Canada. We're talking a lot about diversifying our trade partners around the world. The European Union, we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in manufacturing and energy in all of our products so that we can have better access to that market. But in terms of the carbon tax, we cut the consumer carbon tax. And that covers about 6% of the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. We are maintaining the industrial carbon tax for big polluters, but we're creating a new market so that major polluters will pay people and households to make
Mr.
green
Poilievre,
decisions.
you would axe the second carbon tax as well, the industrial tax. You would eliminate both.
Yes.
Eliminate both. So there's not even a fight against climate change or no incentive except
That's not true.
less gas.
There's a cost associated with using energy already, but my approach is a pragmatic one. For example, the National Bank calculated that if we export our natural gas, our liquefied natural gas, to India, for example, to replace coal, that could reduce emissions in India by 2.5 billion tons. That's 3 times the emissions of all of Canada, and would also bring a lot of money back to Canada. The Liberals are blocking the construction of the pipeline and of the LNG plants. For example, LNG Quebec is a project that would make it possible for us to sell our energy very profitably to Europe and reduce Europe's dependence on Putin. And that's what I would like to do instead of feeding
Mr.
into
Blanchet,
Putin's war machine.
Mr. Carney's abolition of the carbon tax means that Canadians outside of Quebec will receive a rebate for several weeks still for a tax that has been cut. So this puts Quebec in an unjust position. What are you asking in this respect?
Another element, it might give Mr. Carney's an opportunity to answer. Last year, Canada invested $30 billion in oil. Trans Mountain cost $40 billion. It took 9 years to build it. That means that with only just these elements, that's $16 billion of Quebec money that was invested in oil. Do you want a great energy worksite? It's Quebec's green worksite. So let's invest there. With regards to the $3.7 billion, the government would preemptively reimburse the tax carbon. Now the carbon tax. Now they've cancelled the carbon tax before the elections, but they're still sending reimbursements for expenditures that people won't have to do because the carbon tax no longer exists. Quebec is responsible and still has a cap and trade system like California. We're being penalized. We're taking $800 million out of Quebecers' pockets. That's $100 per person, including newborn babies, $800 from everyone's pockets, $100 from everyone's pockets to offer electoral baubles just before an election.
Is there not an injustice there?
It's not an injustice. Quebec is a pioneer in carbon markets, and that's clear. First point. And the second point, Canadians outside of Quebec and British Columbia have paid the carbon tax, and as such, they receive the carbon rebate, and all Canadians, including Quebecers, will receive the middle class tax cut, because we have what we've done. There's a principle here. There's an important principle here.
Yes, you're going to speak in a moment. Just in terms of clarity for those who are listening to us, what reimbursement are you talking about?
The rebate. No, not in Quebec. No, not in Quebec.
But Quebec,
there's a principle.
Gas prices are higher.
There's a principle here. We are making people whole, people who paid the carbon tax, and we're doing that in a fair way.
Europe, Quebec, and California has a system that incentivizes companies to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. It's about 9 cents per litre, and it's much cheaper than the potential effects and the future effects of climate change.
Just to get back to the debate topic, we are talking about the climate crisis here. That is not something that is a long way off. This is something going on right now. We are already in the midst of the climate crisis. We have seen it here in Quebec. Extreme temperatures, forest fires, flooding. I agree with Mr. Blanchet that it is too high a cost to bear, so we need to do something. I spoke with one mother before I became a father, and she said, I'm worried about my children when they play outside. I'm worried about the BC forest fires. Our children cannot breathe the air outside. And now that I am a father, I feel the same anxiety. With forest fires, people cannot breathe the air. So we need to do something. We need to protect our environment, and we need to protect our children.
Mr. Poilievre, you're clear. You're saying that we need a pipeline. If, in spite of all of your efforts with the indigenous nations, they say no, would you impose it in spite of all of your efforts? If Quebec says no, would you impose it?
Well, first of all, you shouldn't assume that, because most Quebecers want a pipeline. According to the polls, look, there's no social acceptability for the status quo. Thank you very much.
That is the most empty sentence I've ever heard in this debate so far.
Can I answer the question?
No, it's nonsense, absolute nonsense.
I'll say what it means. I'll tell you. Quebecers who buy oil from Alberta, it's got to go through the U.S. currently, which gives Donald Trump power over our own energy. You say you're in favor of sovereignty. I'm in favor of economic sovereignty and energy sovereignty, and that requires a pipeline.
It's yet another scarecrow. The U.S. will never bomb their economy so much by sacrificing a hugely profitable product. That's such an amazing argument. How much will your pipeline cost? Trans Mountain cost $40 billion, but now you want a 4,600-kilometer pipeline without investors, with Europe that doesn't even want it in the first place.
Just to clarify, I would never subsidize pipelines. That's unnecessary. They're very profitable. The only reason why it's expensive now is because there are rules and legislation that prevent the construction of pipelines because of bureaucracy. We're going to get rid of red tape. We're going to open this up to
I'll ask my question again.
Protections, cutting environmental regulations.
If indigenous nations, in spite of all your nice efforts, I'm talking about Mr. Carney and you who want a pipeline, if they refuse, what do you do?
Refuse? Are you saying across the board?
Yes, we've seen this.
Because
he can't say that. He doesn't get to impose his will.
Mr. Poilievre, if there are indigenous nations or provinces that are against it, what do you do?
Well, there are others who will be in favor. For example, Mr. Carney opposed a pipeline in the West, which would have enabled us to sell our oil to Asia, the Northern Gateway project. 80% of First Nations were in favor, 20% were against. And in a case like that, I think the majority rules. And I think we need to allow our companies to pay some of their taxes directly to First Nations to fight poverty through industry
Mr.
and
Carney,
production. That's our approach.
would you be ready to impose one?
No, never impose. Can I respond, please? Never impose. No, but a couple of points. First of all, our relationship with the United States has changed everything. So imports from the United States and geography, as Mr. Poilievre has said, around pipelines, those are problems. Those are national security problems for us, and we need to act. That's the first point. Second, on March 21st, there was a meeting of the premiers. All the premiers were here in Ottawa, and we sat down and we agreed. All the premiers signed an agreement to have an energy corridor that would cover oil, natural gas, clean energy, and critical minerals. And with that, and with a process with Indigenous leaders, we can and we could have a solution to this problem. And that's an example of leadership. That's an example of bringing leaders together to meet a national goal. We need to do more than that over this crisis.
I'll ask the question again. If ever Indigenous nations...
No, I've said no.
Against it, you forget the project?
Well, no.
You cannot force projects on people.
Listen, it's a question
I have another question about the environment. Here's the question. You have said that you are a pragmatic person. Do you agree that it is not pragmatic to continue to subsidize oil companies with billions of dollars? That's not pragmatic at all. Would you agree?
Well, I agree with that principle.
Okay, then will you commit to stopping these subsidies?
Absolutely. It's clear.
This is why you need New Democrats. Look at that. We
No,
got a commitment
but
from
it's
Mr.
not
Carney.
new. It's not a new commitment.
This is why you need New
That's not a
Democrats.
new commitment. Let's be very clear.
Mid-February, British Columbia. You, like all other Canadian leaders, said something in English that was, if necessary, you would use the executive emergency powers. You said it. I heard it again yesterday. You would force pipelines through Canada and through Quebec.
No.
After
No,
2
no,
days
no, no.
after that,
No.
with Mr. Roy,
That's not it. That's not it at all.
no, please be nice, we're almost friends. But then you said to Monsieur Roy, I would never like to force this. So it's not rules that stop this, it's social acceptability that stopped this pipeline because people said no.
Mr. Carney, please reply.
Okay, no. It's the use of emergency powers for the federal government. That's for federal approval. But there also has to be approval, for example, here in Quebec. There has to be approval from the provinces and the support of indigenous people. This is Canada. That's how Canada works. But another point, if I may, we're starting to see cooperation agreements come into place with the provinces to have one project, one evaluation, and that's going to accelerate the approval of major projects in Canada.
Right, Mr. Blanchet, you said that I have a greater chance of signing the Canadian Constitution than approving a pipeline. But how could you really paint yourself in such a corner and say never, ever? If our relationship with the U.S. gets worse, the pipeline goes to the United States, if our ports become trickier in terms of imports, what would you do? What would
Mr.
you
Trump's
tie your hands?
threat is a very serious one. But he won't self-destruct the American economy. And Americans think that Canadian oil is in their backyard. There's no rule that stops oil from being built or circulating. But Quebecers didn't want it. And Mr. Carney said, I will like to respect Quebec's environmental rules. So there are certain elements that are incoherent from him.
Never. It's a long
It's still
time.
no, because Quebec is the best placed in the world to develop a green super energy market that goes right to the south without asking Ottawa's permission. Why would we invest in oil that doesn't have economic benefits for Quebec if it means that we still pay more at the pump?
Two quick comments. You are slightly behind. In terms of the tramway and the third link, we're talking about the environment and public transit as well. So the third link, would you fund this or the tramway? One or the other, or both?
Yes, for the Quebec City Tramway, we support public transit. We are against projects that are bad for the environment.
So you're against the third link.
Exactly. We are against the third link. We support the tramway. One solution to address the climate crisis, while at the same time helping our economy, is to invest heavily in public transit. This would help municipalities, this would help provinces. We could work together with them and use transfers to provide more funding for these projects. And they're the sort of projects we need. They would create good jobs while at the same time helping Canada reduce emissions.
Mr. Poilievre, tramway or a third link, both, or just the third link?
Just the third link. You have to make choices. And I would speak to people in the regions today. The other parties are against the third link, and they want to ban gas-powered cars. That's not practical in the regions of our country. You need a truck, you need a car in order to live in regional areas. So I'm going to reverse that. You'll be able to keep your truck. We will build highways and bridges so that you can live a good life in the
Mr.
regions.
Blanchet, both projects?
The Quebec government wants the tramway. The city of Quebec City, rather, wants the tramway. The federal government needs to give the money required to the provincial government for the tramway. We don't know what a third link looks like. We don't know where it's going to go, under, over. We don't know what color it's going to be.
You are supposed to give your opinion on that for the past 3 debates.
Please remind me of my past.
Mr. Carney?
Well, I can be quick. Tramway, yes, because there is a project that's underway. We support it. And as Mr. Blanchet has said, there is no project right now for the third link.
But I think the third link will be a blue one.
It'll be blue? Right.
I don't have a lot of time left, but I'll add one more question. Do we have to speed up the development of nuclear power?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And for a couple of reasons.
Across Quebec, in Ontario?
Well, yeah. It's a choice that Quebec and the provinces will make. But we have a major advantage here in Canada. We have uranium. We have big nuclear companies, including Westinghouse, Candu, and others. And we have technology in small modular reactors. So it's a great opportunity.
I understand there are worlds in the countries in the world that need nuclear energy. I don't think Canada needs nuclear energy. Quebec doesn't want it. I'm not going to interfere in Canadian energy.
Well,
but
they could be reviewed.
No, Quebecers don't want nuclear energy. I'm also the one that managed the closure of the Gentilly plant.
But we're not going to reopen it.
As a national project, I am in favor of an east-west energy grid that would connect Quebec with Manitoba and BC to transport clean energy. It could. I'm not so much in favor of nuclear energy. I support renewable and hydro energy more.
In favor. Yep. That's one of the best sources of electricity. It provides 60% of the electricity in Ontario. Unfortunately, bureaucracy slows down construction without adding any safety. So I would take the politicians off the Nuclear Safety Commission and allow scientists to do the work so that we can add that source of energy to the portfolio.
This is the first time I've heard Mr. Poilievre say something pro-science.
Immigration. Next theme, immigration and foreign affairs.
There are lots of issues with immigration that are linked to Donald Trump. It's hard to immigrate these days. I'd like to stay if I can find a good job. We have to deal with people who are arriving in droves because people are arriving and they don't have work. Should we let them in or not? Why not? Why not welcome them if we have the capacity? Do you think we should let in anyone who wants to come? In the United States, there's one rule. In Canada, there's another. I think everyone should follow the rule. We know there are over 500,000 Haitians currently living in the United States who are now being threatened with deportation. They might lose their temporary protection. I'll show you the numbers here. This is the number of people crossing the border in Saint-Bernard-de-la-Colle. 1,411 people in the first half of April. That's more than in March, February, or January. So you can see the numbers are growing. Simple question. You have 35 seconds each. Would you accept these Haitians into Canada or not? Mr. Carney.
Well, first of all, this is a question of humanity. This is a human issue. And these are some of the most vulnerable people in North America. But there are limits. We have to be human, but we have to be realistic. Canada cannot accept everyone. And we have an agreement with the Americans, the Safe Third Country Agreement. And under that agreement, we will send back most asylum seekers.
So they would be mostly sent back to the U.S. Mr. Blanchet.
The rules aren't tributary to the origin of the requester. We can't say we'll welcome the Haitians, but tough luck to the Venezuelans. The rules need to be the same for everyone. I'm particularly sensitive to this because I often meet with Haitian representatives. They are francophones, and so it's easier for them to integrate into Quebec. If Quebec is able financially to welcome them, then I'm sympathetic. But the rules have to be applied, and Quebec's welcoming capacity is at its very limit.
The formal rule now would be to send them back because they are in a safe third country, i.e. the U.S. Mr. Singh.
In general, we should do our part. It's a question of humanity and compassion. We appreciate the fact that our country is founded on immigration. That is something important to us. We want immigration levels that are in line with our needs. But yes, we need to take in people, but if we cannot accept people, well, we don't want them to have a bad life here in Canada or in Quebec. So we need immigration, but we cannot take everyone.
Yes or no?
The specific question?
The question is,
Do we accept those people?
for the people crossing the border at L'École, would they be welcome to Canada or not? Because we have the right to send them back under the Safe Third Country Agreement.
Unfortunately, they have to be returned because immigration has to follow the normal entry points. Quebecers are extremely generous and welcoming. They welcomed my wife, as Mr. Blanchet mentioned, but the Liberal government has abused Quebecers' generosity with an out-of-control immigration system. The population has grown 3 times faster than the number of new homes built. This has created a housing crisis in Quebec. They're at the breaking point. And the government of Quebec has been given the power to choose immigrants. That was under the Mulroney government that power was delegated to Quebec. So we need to have realistic numbers, realistic based on our housing capacity.
Here. What Mr. Poilievre is saying is that immigrants should be blamed for something that is really the fault of successive conservative and liberal governments who have not invested enough in our resources, who have not built enough housing, who have not welcomed people in the way that they should have been welcomed. This cannot be blamed on immigrants.
All right.
That's not true.
Quebec is now asking, given the number of asylum seekers in its territory, for $500 million. That was the amount they asked for in 2024. Mr. Poilievre, you'll be starting this open debate. Would you be sending a $500 million check to Quebec?
We have to work with the government of Quebec to fix the damage the Liberals caused with an out-of-control immigration system. And I also have to say that I reject the Century Initiative, which is a Liberal policy to balloon Canada's population to 100 million people. That's extreme. I think we should go back to immigration levels that are such that the population never grows faster than the number of houses, jobs, or healthcare services available.
Would you give more money to Quebec? And more generally, where would you like to have the immigration quota set?
Yes, we'll start with the second part. We need to have a cap on all types of immigration for a certain amount of time so that we can increase our capacity to welcome newcomers to Canada, including in housing, in training and language training here in Quebec, and make sure that the social safety net can accept them. And in those circumstances...
the targets announced by your predecessor, Mr. Trudeau, you would bring them down further, is that correct?
Well, there are some challenges here in Quebec, for example. Challenges with temporary foreign workers, for example. And it's a question of distribution, if I can say it that way. The distribution of workers across Quebec. And there's a shortage of workers. But we will maintain the cap on immigration for certainly a couple of years so that we can increase our ability to welcome newcomers.
Would you reduce the number of immigrants to Canada in general?
Instead of answering with a simple yes or no, I would want to base our response on the facts. It is obvious that we need immigration. When I speak to Quebec farmers, they tell me, yes, we need immigrants to work on our farms. When I talk to small and medium businesses, they tell me that we need immigrants. The question is, what level of immigration? We would base our immigration levels on the findings of an expert panel, which would study our capacities. Then we would have a data-based number. But I do not want to fall into the trap of fear-mongering or blaming immigrants for things. We need a facts-based, needs-based approach.
Temporary foreign workers are temporary. They're a different category. Foreign students are a separate category, and they are essential for our post-secondary establishments in Quebec and in Canada. Unfortunately, it's being used as a roundabout way to get asylum, and asylum is also taken advantage of through smuggling and organized crime. We don't want to import vulnerable workers because we simply need people. Asylum seekers should be people who are in distress that we need to welcome based on our welcoming capacity. We are not currently in Quebec able to welcome as many people that are arriving. Quebec needs to be able to establish what its targets are. And one clear element, the federal parliament, with a Bloc Québécois initiative, decided to force the federal government to consult provinces within 100 days to determine how many immigrants would be welcomed. No one can decide, apart from Quebec, how much Quebec can accept and welcome.
Another rare moment where I agree with Mr. Blanchet. Temporary foreign workers are often victims of power abuses. We would restrict the use of workers who are exploited by major corporations.
The Centre Initiative was 100 million immigrants in Canada before the end of the century. Dominic Barton, a parliamentary committee, said that they did not take into account the uniqueness of Quebec, and one of the two co-authors of the Centre Initiative and 100 million people is now one of Mr. Carney's close advisors.
Mr. Carney, on a different subject now, would you say that the immigration system in Canada is going off the rails, or has gone off the rails in the last 7 or 8 years?
Yes. The system isn't working. And especially after the pandemic. Our population has gone up, I think, at about 3% per year because of immigration. And that's why we need to have a cap for a certain period of time. And I'd like to say that Canadians, Quebecers, and all Canadians, they want to welcome immigrants. There's no problem with Canadians' attitudes here at all. It's the responsibility of all of us to increase our capacity to welcome newcomers.
Is it normal? Now, in France, it takes 6 months. In Germany, 8 months. So, why do asylum seekers coming to Canada take at least 3 years to be processed?
Because Canada is obstinate in welcoming more people than they can process, house, and they're not taking into account the proportionality of every province and territory.
I spoke with federal public servants, and they told me that there is a lack of resources. There aren't enough workers to manage all the files that are coming in. It's unthinkable that people have to wait 3 years for an answer.
But is that not the big problem?
It's a huge problem. So we need to have more people working on this. People who can make decisions, or at the very least provide an answer, because it is entirely unacceptable that we have people waiting so long.
Mr. Poilievre, is this problem solvable?
Yes.
Look, it's all about efficiency. By screening out bogus asylum seekers, that's what's slowing things down. We could reduce processing times by getting rid of the bogus claimants. And when people are forum shopping, when they've been to other places, that also slows things down and discourages genuine claimants. My point of view is that if someone's in danger in their country of origin, they should be able to decide to come to Canada. But if they're not refugees, for example, we've seen a situation in Mexico where people came here without ever needing to be refugees. They never needed asylum, and that causes a bottleneck in the system. And so what we're going to do is ensure that genuine refugees can come here and have their lives saved through the generosity of Canadians.
But how do you separate the real ones from the non-real ones?
Well, that's the problem. The machine, the apparatus is too cumbersome. And Mexico was one of the causes in the problem. So by eliminating that source, that helps alleviate the problem.
Is that an acceptable wait time in Canada?
No, it's not acceptable. It's inhumane. It's inhumane for asylum seekers. And that's an indication that there is a problem with productivity in that department. That takes resources, but it's also a question of productivity.
Why not hitting the brake pedal with kindness, of course? Why not slow things down until we have a good system and a good public service for immigration that can deal with files in a few months? The rhythm is far too quick, and so we can't succeed at this rate. People, for economic reasons or who are in distress for other reasons, come to Canada and they're lost because their files aren't being processed.
You can conclude, Mr. Carney.
I more or less agree with that, but we need to be, as you've said, we need to be neutral. We need to act in a neutral and fair way.
All right.
A fair way for all.
I want to save some time to talk about two other important files: international aid, Ukraine, and Gaza. I think we've understood your position on immigration. The question is simple. Should we cut international aid or not? I'll give you some figures here. $2.1 billion is being given to Ukraine currently. That's a large amount of money for Canada. Ethiopia also, Haiti. There's a long list of other countries that we could have put up on the board. Mr. Poilievre, you've said that we need to cut international aid. What would you cut? Ukraine, Ethiopia, Haiti?
No. I would start by cutting off China. The Liberal government gave $250 million to the Chinese Infrastructure Bank in order to build pipelines, highways, and other infrastructure to promote the expansion of Beijing's empire. I don't think that's a good use of taxpayer money. Also, we saw UNRWA, the organization in the Gaza Strip that took part, or whose employees took part in the attacks of September 7th. So I don't think we should be funding that type of activity either. The aid we give should be directly to people in need and not through bureaucracies, multinational bureaucracies and terrorists.
Let's talk about Gaza. Currently, Doctors Without Borders, just today, said that the situation was worse than ever. So if you cut UNRWA, which might be an imperfect organization, but if you cut aid to them, how can Canada help Palestinians?
With not-for-profit groups, NGOs that will deliver the services directly to Gazans.
The only group
on the ground.
I'd like to
because it's a waste of money. When that money that's not even getting to the people.
I will start by saying if there's anyone in an organization with a problem, then yes, that should be investigated. But what you said about UNRWA was disgusting. This is the only organization that is helping out people on the ground. And you painted the entire organization with the same brush, calling it a terrorist organization. That is unacceptable. That is hateful, and it is entirely inappropriate.
Mr. Carney, on this subject of Palestinians and international aid, would you continue to fund UNRWA?
Yes. We are in a situation where we need to have an immediate ceasefire. We need to have all the hostages returned, and we need to resume humanitarian aid to Gaza. And at this time, we have $100 million from the Government of Canada that is ready to be provided in humanitarian aid to Gaza with organizations that are working there. And that's key. And I agree with Mr. Singh. There are only a couple of groups that are working in Gaza right now.
Mr. Blanchet?
It's a very unique situation. In Canada and in Quebec, the Jewish community is victims of radical Islamists. Palestinians are currently victims of terrible violence from the Israeli regime. We have to help people in distress. There and elsewhere, it's the best way to have international aid that is not military. We need to allow people to live happily where they live. And Palestine will not become Mar-a-Lago for Americans that just want to chill on the coast. We have to see where the money goes. We have to see how much money is taken by Hamas. It's maybe less now, but it was huge in the past. A lot of money was taken from the Palestinians. We have to help Palestinians at the end of the day.
International aid. So the three of you on this side would continue. Mr. Poilievre, do you have an amount in your mind of how much you would cut in international aid?
We're going to target waste. In all programs, we will audit to identify examples like UNRWA when they used funds for Hamas. We're also going to find other examples of international waste because...
Sorry.
No, the decision is to protect Canadian taxpayers. We all agree that there's a lot of suffering here in Canada, and Canadians can't afford to pay their bills. So we need to find some savings in order to reduce the cost of living here in Canada.
Mr. Roy, I would like to come back to...
And we need to look at all departments in order to find those savings and protect affordability
to the question of Gaza.
Mr. Singh, I'm sorry, everyone's had their piece to say.
The situation is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see innocent people being killed. Mr. Carney, why don't you call things as they are? This is a genocide. People in Israel do deserve peace and security, but people in Palestine do as well. What is going on right now is a genocide against people
Mr.
in
Carney,
Palestine.
you can conclude.
Why won't you admit it?
The situation in Gaza, in the Middle East, is horrible. But
it's a genocide.
But I never use that word in a political way to politicize the situation.
But it's a matter of facts.
That was Mr. Carney's response. I think we've understood your question, Mr. Singh. Now, we'll be moving on to the next theme, identity and sovereignty.
It would be good to put flags out on our balconies to show our Canadian pride. I was surprised to see how proud people were. We're Canadian. We will not be Americans. I think we're going to be more united. I think I haven't seen this in a long time. So, yes, we've all seen this across Canada. All commentators have seen this. There is a wave of patriotism in Canada, but we've also seen deep divisions. In the West, Alberta says it may separate. We've given 6 months to the next Prime Minister to meet its requests. Otherwise, there could be a crisis of national unity that is unprecedented. In Quebec, the Parti Québécois is nearing power and is promising a referendum during your term, possibly. At the end of the day, Are we not as divided or as the US or very divided? We'll go around the table. Mr. Poilievre first.
Unfortunately, yes, there are divisions all across Canada, all kinds of divisions. And I think that we've had a federal government that has divided everyone, pitting regions against one another and various groups against one another. Social classes pitted against one another. We need to unite Canadians. We need to unite around our common identity. That includes the French language, our English language, our military, the promise of Canada that anyone who works hard can have a great life in a beautiful house on a safe street.
Thank you. Mr. Singh? Is there not division in Canada?
When I travel throughout the country, I observe great unity, great solidarity. Canadians want to defend our country. They do not want to become the 51st state. They want to protect what is dear to our hearts. When I talk to people about identity, people tell me our identity is taking care of one another. We have programs for that. For example, our healthcare system. We need to protect these systems and strengthen them, not cut them or sacrifice them. Now is the time to bring people together.
Thank you.
To get things done with our solidarity.
Thank you. Mr. Blanchet.
I think that people confuse certain things. Some people think that all Canadians should follow one single line behind the federal government, and so we only have one economy. Mr. Trump's fear, or rather the threat of Mr. Trump has to be taken seriously, but instrumentalizing it for nation building in Canada, where Quebecers are being asked to be attached to their language as a frivolity, I can't agree with that.
Thank you. We'll go back.
Quebec's uniqueness is also economic, and we have to be on the same level
Is there
playing
a
field.
division in Canada?
Well, there's always a risk. But I think that right now, Canadians are uniting, and they want to unite. Canadians want a positive agenda. There is solidarity here. Healthcare is a right here in Canada. It's not a big business like in the United States. We put a value on diversity here. And we also put importance on judicial independence. And, the potential of Canada is enormous because we're all in this together.
Thank you. So open debate. Mr. Blanchet, how can we think that Quebec, if it's on its own and independent, could be stronger to stand up to Trump and in comparison with all of Canada right now?
Does Canada need to be a province of Mexico to be allied to Mexico against the states? We're not in that debate this week, but Quebec does not need to be a Canadian province to talk of its own voice. Our economy is doing fairly well, but our economy is different to that of Canada's, and the announcements that have been made have helped Ontario Steel, Ontario Banking, the Ontario automotive industry to
Quebec
fund
Aluminum.
Western oil. That is what those were the investments made. The counter tariffs on aluminium are very harmful because people have to pay for the aluminium they sent to be processed in the States. There's then re-imported into Canada. $2 billion to the States in countervailing tariffs. For that, nothing happened. But now, $2 billion has simply been signed by Mr. Carney for the automotive industry. He sees himself as a negotiator, but he hasn't even been re-elected yet. Should Quebecers not make sure that they have a strong voice that collaborates? I've already said that we would work with Canada, but I've asked to speak to Mr. Carney, but he's never called me. He's never wanted to talk to me. I want Quebec to be at the negotiating table for a stronger negotiating position with Canada.
Is there also not a risk, like was the case with the automotive industry in Ontario, to this because this could happen to the detriment of saving other industries in our country. If we put all our eggs in the automotive basket.
Not at all. For example, our counter tariffs for the aluminum sector and steel, no, they're not bad. They're not bad at all.
We import aluminium cans from the States that comes from our
that's
mined
not
aluminium
right at all. If I may, the counter tariffs for the aluminum sector are $30 billion. The counter tariffs, or $30 billion rather, the counter tariffs for the automotive sector, that's $8 billion. That's a huge difference because, there are a number of reasons for this, but our counter tariffs, it's not just for Quebec, it's for the workers there, are much higher.
I don't know where that money came from, and I don't know when the industry will get that money.
We are using the counter tariffs.
What was it, $2 billion for automotive? Immediately for them, because we're shaking in our boots when the automotive industry is at risk. But aluminium was not supported. There's no processing capacity. There's no help for temporary work losses. $2 billion for the automotive industry, but nothing for aluminium. When it's Ontario, the checks come flying, but it has to be the same for other places, especially Quebec.
That's the numbers. Your numbers are wrong.
Mr. Poilievre.
Yeah, but he's got a point when he says that the weakness in our country right now threatens our unity. Your Liberal government for 10 years has the worst track record on immigration, on housing, on inflation, on crime. But doesn't it embarrass you to ask Canadians for a fourth term of office after the worst Liberal record?
I've just become leader. And
same members of parliament, it's the same old promises.
Leader. And I've been Prime Minister for 1 month. And in that month, we have an agreement with the provinces. We have an agreement with Australia. We have an agreement with France. We have an agreement with the United Kingdom. We have set up negotiations for the next Prime Minister, and that's a decision that people at home are going to make. And we've done all of that in this short time. And we've also cut the tax. We've put in place programs for workers who are most affected by this tariff war, and all that in 1 month.
Okay.
Quebec sent a letter with 5 requests. No one responded to it. We made requests, but we keep hearing, we've spoken to provinces, things are great with Quebec, but we didn't get any response to our letter. Is it because of the final straight of the election campaign? What's going on?
Mr. Carney, you described healthcare as a right, and I agree with that. But you are talking about massive cuts to healthcare. You
not at all.
Admitted it.
Mr. Singh, I let you speak earlier.
The long-time Liberal government House Leader, Karina Gold, agreed that there would be
Mr. Singh, cut his mic. I let you speak more earlier, but now we're nearing the end. We're talking about Quebec and French. Does Quebec have the right to defend French, even at the cost of using the notwithstanding clause upstream? Mr. Poilievre.
Yes. Quebec must defend French. It's the common language of Quebec, and I will defend French. My father was a francophone from Saskatchewan. I lost my French a little bit when I was a teenager, but I married a Quebecer. Our children speak French, and I understand why French needs to be protected. And that is why I will continue to support laws and policies that allow Quebec and the federal government to protect French all across Canada.
Using the notwithstanding clause to protect something, you're against that, Mr. Carney?
Well, there is a general question here around the use of the notwithstanding clause in a preventative way. And it's not necessarily a question just for Quebec. It's been used in Quebec, but it could also apply in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. And it has. And so the question is, do we have rights and freedoms here in Canada? Are we equal? And we need to consider the right balance. Certainly, but the use of the notwithstanding clause in a preventative way, that's a question for the Supreme Court.
Mr. Blanchet, in terms of the use of the notwithstanding clause, obviously you have no problem with that.
Jean Chrétien, on behalf of Pierre Trudeau, negotiated with the provinces, and it led to the notwithstanding clause, and this wasn't signed on by Quebec. It was tested. It's not the type of use that is in question, it's how it is used. The Supreme Court has already decided. Mr. Carney wants to turn to the Supreme Court to disagree with itself in the decision it made with Quebec. It's all funded with Quebec money.
Interveners from Quebec who have challenged this to the Supreme Court.
You are going to take Quebec taxpayer money to contest a Quebec bill that is under Quebec jurisdiction. That was adopted by the National Assembly of Quebec.
Mr. Singh, on this notwithstanding clause for French.
I believe in protecting the French language. During this debate, I have tried to bring up health a few times. Mr. Roy cut me off a number of times. Look at my time on the clock. Every time I tried to bring up healthcare, I was responding directly to something that Mr. Carney said, because health is something that is important for me. It is about identity. It's something I am very passionate about, and every time I tried to bring it up, Mr. Roy called me out and cut me off. That is not fair. For me, the question of healthcare is crucial. When I talk to people on the street and ask them what is important to them, they say universal public healthcare. People ought to know that the other leaders on this stage tonight would cut healthcare funding, and I think that's wrong.
No.
Not now, Mr. Blanchet.
No, neither
the two
Mr.
major leaders
Blanchet
have
nor
both
I have said
this,
that.
and I need to tell people because it's important. This is what I believe in. This is what I believe in and what the NDP believes in.
That's not right to make allegations
Okay,
like that.
we talked about health earlier. I let you speak, but now we're moving on to another topic.
Yes, but now we need to bring it up in the context of
Okay.
identity. What is Canadian identity? Healthcare. We have to bring it up in this part of the debate. Canadian identity is about taking care of one another. We need our universal public healthcare system. It should be strengthened. It should be protected. We are in the midst of a healthcare crisis. It's supposed to be an open debate, so we should be able to talk about whatever topic comes up.
There isn't a lot of risk when it comes to the health of a language in
Let's
Quebec.
talk about language.
There's
Outside
healthcare
of
issues in Quebec as well, and I am here to protect the healthcare system for everyone, including Quebecers.
Outside of Quebec, Mr. Singh and others, the weighting of francophones has gone from 6% in 71 to 3.5% in 2021. How will you reverse this trend? People are listening to you across Canada.
Well, first of all, we are going to increase the level of Francophone immigrants outside of Quebec. We'll increase that from 10 to 12%. Second, we will strengthen Radio-Canada and CBC with new governance structure and new money. Mr. Poilievre wants to cut that. We are going to strengthen the telefilm industry and the Canadian Council for the Arts so that we can increase training.
All right, Mr. Poilievre.
First of all, the Conservative Party supported the federal legislation to ensure that federally regulated workplaces in Quebec follow Bill 101. We also will increase funding to allow young people to take part in French immersion for Anglophones coming from outside Quebec, and that will enrich the French language. And third, we'll make sure Quebec has more control over immigrant selection so that they can better choose those who can be franchised and integrated into the labor market and Quebec culture. That's what we want to do to protect the French language.
Mr. Polyev, of course, your position on Radio-Canada and the CBC has created a lot of concerns. You've continued to say that you would protect Radio-Canada because it provides a service to Francophone minorities across the country, but you would abolish the CBC. How is such a thing possible?
Well, it is possible. We have news networks.
But they share the same buildings. You understand how difficult it would be.
I do understand the situation. I will protect Radio-Canada's services because there's already other French language news services. TVA is an example. So it is possible to have news service that's focused on French news services, and the CBC can just operate with its own revenues as an NGO,
what would the timeline
as a non-governmental organization. The principle is that the government should simply do what the market cannot do, and the market would never be able to provide exclusive French services to Francophones all across Canada. So there is a role for the government to play in defending French news services. When I was a young person in Calgary, that was the only way for me to get news in French. So I would protect those services because there's a good reason to do that.
Let me translate that. Mr. Poilievre wants to get rid of Radio-Canada and CBC. And then he would write a check to other companies so that they can provide French language services. That's the wrong thing to do. We would protect Radio-Canada and CBC, especially in the context of a misinformation which is undermining our democracy. I am not a francophone, but I am a francophile. I love the French language. I have fallen in love with it. It enriches our country. Having Quebec benefits all of Canada. The forward-thinking ideas that have come out of Quebec, we need Quebec. We need the French language, and we will protect them.
For the first time since 2011, there are no women here as leaders. I met with a young woman. This is a very short clip. I met with her earlier this week. Do you have a question for the leaders, something you're concerned about? In Canada, the status of women. Yeah, the status of women. You're worried about things moving backward? Yes, that there could be a rollback of women's rights by some parties. That concerns me. My question, would you commit to making sure that there are no women's rights that are rolled back? And, for example, would you push for having free contraception, as is already the case in some provinces? Is that something that you would commit to, starting with Mr. Polyev?
We will not eliminate that. We will protect women's rights. I have a message for Canadian women who are watching. We will not pass legislation that would restrict the right to abortion. That's been our policy for 20 years, and it won't change. That's a guarantee that I make to you. We will, in fact, broaden women's rights by dealing with crime against women. Women are often victims of assaulters who are released because of liberal legislation. They're released repeatedly, and that allows serious criminals to repeat offend against women. And we are going to lock those people up. We're going to lock those men up to protect women against violence.
Of course, our party believes in women's rights. We would never allow for any backsliding on that front. You brought up pharmacare. Well, it was the NDP that forced the Liberal government to bring in pharmacare. It covers now diabetes medication, but also contraceptives, and we believe that is crucial. Rights are important, but being able to access the right is also important. We are also the only party running a candidate slate that is half women. The other parties have seen backsliding on their candidate slates in terms of diverse people and women. But for us, it's an important issue. Our candidate slate must represent the Canadian public, and that means it should be half women. For us, We will always defend women's rights and also access
Thank you. Mr.
to
Blanchet.
those rights.
There is no member of the Bloc Québécois that will be able to table a bill or motions that are against abortion. Preventive Maid will also not be allowed. With American influence, we are in a very difficult place for women. There are many ways that invite women to participate in politics. We have reached parity with the Bloc Québécois. We wanted it to be 50-50, but in our current political culture, and I have many great women in my party, it's much more difficult at the federal level than in Quebec.
Yes, I think that this an aspect of politics right now, the negative politics that we're seeing, it's becoming more and more difficult to recruit women as candidates, and really any candidate. But absolutely, we defend the rights of women all the time. But what I'm concerned about is the use of the notwithstanding clause. Not in a preventative way, but after Supreme Court judgments have been made. What does that do? It takes away Canadians' rights and freedoms. And it creates, and Mr. Poilievre has proposed this I know the situation, but this is a very dangerous development, because if we start with that, abortion could be,
Give the right to reply.
the right to abortion could eventually be next.
Mr. Poilievre, you can answer.
Mr. Kearney, I said in a case where a man kills 6 people in a premeditated way and the court released that person, that means he served 4 years for each life he took. The criminal in that case will be free in 50 years. You're talking about danger. That's what's dangerous. Liberal laws that allow criminals to circulate on our streets. I will never excuse for locking murderers up.
No, I'm sorry, but you're trying to change the Canadian Constitution.
All right, gentlemen.
That's what you've proposed.
I would use Section 33 to put an end to the crime that Liberals caused
starting there,
with their policies.
Where will you stop?
By stopping murderers, yes.
Everyone knows that there should be severe penalties for murder. You're trying to sow division here. Everyone agrees on that front. If someone kills someone, there needs to be a strong punishment. You're not special for proposing that.
No, the other 3
Everyone
parties
agrees.
All right, Mr. Blanchet. Very quickly, please.
Mr. Carney said that I voted for the new Official Languages Act bill. The money comes from the previous bill, and the official language minority community money comes from the bill. I was asked to bring changes. We brought the changes. We voted for, but we didn't want it to apply to Quebec because it harms Quebec.
Gentlemen, you know, things didn't turn out perfectly, but Mr. Singh, you say you got 22 minutes compared to 24, 25. Roughly equitable. I'm sorry that I did have to cut off your mic, but I'd like to wish all 4 of you good luck with the rest of the campaign, and I hope that we'll see your costed plans as soon as possible so that we can see how much all of your promises will cost. And I hope that everyone listening tonight will be able to make an informed decision now. Voting starts this weekend.
And the game.
And the match? I don't know. There's still a couple periods left. All right. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes this debate. See you next time. Good night.
Just never end. They droned on and on and on about just pipelines, and basically, it was a lot. Then they finally moved on to immigration. And instead of talking about Canada's immigration plan, the question was framed about Donald Trump. So we heard that, that Trump was terrible and that because of that, there were going to be asylum seekers coming across the border. And the question was whether or not the leaders would accept asylum seekers from the United States, which was just absolutely absurd way of framing it. Then they moved on to talk a lot about foreign aid. And at that point, we heard that both Mark Carney and Jagmeet Singh are strong supporters of UNRWA, which is quite surprising given the revelations that UNRWA was involved in the October 7th massacre. That is very well documented. So that was an interesting little tidbit. Then we went on to Canadian nationalism and this whole like elbows up thing. We ended up talking back about Donald Trump again. I said on X that if you were playing a drinking game and you had
every time they said Trump, you would be completely drunk within like 5 minutes of the debate because we just heard a lot about Donald Trump. And then the last 10 minutes were focused on abortion. I don't really understand why that was an issue, given that all of the leaders agree, which doesn't really give Canadians much choice. Like there's a lot of pro-life Canadians, there's a lot of Catholic and religious Canadians, and none of our views are represented by these leaders. Instead, they're all trying to one-up one another over who will support abortion the most, I guess. And good for Pierre Poilievre at least to focus it on crime, because that is somewhere where they have a distinction. And I like that policy of Pierre Poilievre pledging to use the notwithstanding clause to make mass murderers actually stay in jail for their whole lives, as they should. So, as far as who won the debate, well, Canadians certainly didn't. I'm going to put it to the chat on YouTube. You could tell us. We put a chat up. You can vote up on our screen here. We've got 350 so far votes. So go ahead and vote. Who do you think won the debate? I would probably go with Francois Blanchette. I thought that he had a strong night. And it certainly wasn't Carney. Carney came across quite weak to me. And I don't think he did what he needed to do. It was interesting that Pierre Poilievre had the most amount of time speaking. It seemed like, that's always kind of destined to happen because he has the outlying views, right? The other parties tend to agree on most things, and the Conservatives tend to be the one that disagrees. There was some teaming up on Mark Carney, but also plenty of teaming up from an ideological perspective on Pierre Poilievre. So, David, what did you think of this debate? Who do you think won, and what were your sort of top takeaway moments?
Carney lost badly, I think. I have a French-Canadian link on that, and they said they believe that Blanchette, the way it was playing in Quebec from their perspective, Carney lost badly. If I didn't have that perspective, I would still say that Blanchette was the winner. He presented himself. It's a distinctive voice. It is a French debate. It's very much played around Quebec and Quebec's interests. I thought that Poilievre did great. I thought he carried himself well. He looked prime ministerial. Carney looked scared. He looked brittle. He looked reactive. He wasn't smiling. I noticed it was odd. He wasn't making eye contact with Blanchette when Blanchette was speaking with him. He was sort of, maybe his team had told him, stare at the camera, but some of the side views looked odd. He seemed wooden, and it might be, I'm sympathetic, if I had to carry on a debate in French and didn't have the skill set, I think it could be tough. I think, though, that he's run himself into a bigger problem. We talked before the debate about the fact that he's tended to say two different things in two different settings and kind of hope that he can elide past what that means. And he was called out very directly by Blanchette, who made the point that he had said something in the English language and different from what he'd said in French language. But I think that Carney is going to wear some of these issues. And I thought UNRWA is a terrible position for the Liberal Party to be in. That is a completely Hamas-penetrated front operation. We know that for a fact now. It's disgusting how many terrorists that they know were implicated by the October 7th events, as well as the infrastructure of UNRWA completely controlled by Hamas in the West Bank. The fact that Canadian tax dollars continue to go to organizations like that rather than been held back by us on the premise that there has to be release of hostages is extraordinary to me. And again, Canada just maintains this bizarre position on the International Criminal Court with respect to the Islamist judge going after Netanyahu, etc. We're complete outliers in civil society on these issues. And I think that that's going to cost Carney and some very specific groups. If I'm a Jewish voter in Montreal or Toronto right now, you lost me on UNRWA, right? I think they tried to pin Poilievre again. Poilievre's got to deal with his challenge with boomers and with women in particular. And I think they were hoping to make that last dialogue around women an issue for Poilievre, but I think he did a smart job making it about crime and security. So
absolutely. Well, and it was interesting because just I think it was a week ago, someone in the audience at one of his debates said that Israel's committing genocide, and he said, "I know." And then tonight he was asked about that word because Jagmeet Singh is, kind of obsessed with this idea that Israel is committing genocide, and so he was really trying to press Carney on that, and Carney said, "I don't like you using that word," which I agree with. I think that was the right thing to say. We don't just throw around the term genocide. I wish his predecessors in the Liberal Party would have taken that approach because remember, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that Canada is currently committing a genocide. He said that with regards to the missing and murdered Aboriginal, Indigenous women file, which, as we know, that sadly most of the women who die from that community, they're murdered by a partner, an intimate partner. It's like 90%. So this idea that there's a genocide happening in our country right now is absurd. I was happy that Mark Carney said no about that. However, it's very interesting. Okay, I want to give this little tidbit to the audience. We are waiting for the most exciting part, I think, of this debate, which will be the questions. Kian Bexley sent me a photo, and he is at the very front of the line. So when the leaders come out, the first question will be our own Kian Bexley of Juno News. I think we have a picture. Do we have that? Can we show it? Anyway, he's there. He said there's 20 CBC journalists behind him, and he's number one. So we're looking forward to that, Kian. And I hope you have a good question, man. So we're going to go back and forth between those questions, those scrums. It's going to be happening. We've got, again, one eye on that. And so we'll just give a little bit of our reaction from the debate. So, I kind of ran through what the debate was about. We've got a couple of clips from the debate, which, I think that the first 15, 20 minutes of the debate were just kind of silly. Like it was just totally about Trump. And, they started out by trying to say let's not make this whole debate about Trump. So talk about one thing or two things that aren't about Trump. But then everyone ended up talking about Trump a little bit. And then the next question was Trump, Trump, Trump. This is a good moment that Pierre Poilievre had early when most people are still probably watching. And that was when he told Mark Carney, you were Justin Trudeau's economic advisor because Mark Carney was trying to play the whole I'm an outsider kind of thing, and Pierre Poilievre said, "No, you were there." I think we have that clip. Do we have that clip? If so, let's play it. Oh, okay, we don't have it yet, but to me, the first 20 minutes, David, are kind of like the thing that really counts. It's when the stage is set. And I don't really know that there was a major knockout punch moment in the debate. This is as close as we got to one. I think it was a strong moment. And I agree with you that Carney just seemed weak. He didn't present like a strong, confident person. He seemed quite easily shaken, not really confident. I mean, I feel for the guy. Maybe it's because his French is quite not great from what I was reading and what I was hearing. I was obviously listening through the translated debate, but perhaps it was because his French isn't that strong. What do you think?
Look, I think that the debate, kudos to the debate organizers. This is one of the best debates that I've seen in that everybody got a word in. There was a lot of divergent conversations, but it was controlled. It had momentum. The debate followed a track. They got to all 5 key issues, but they allowed a fair amount of free-form engagement. And I don't think that Carney has had much of that. I think that almost everything he's done has been heavily scripted, heavily controlled. I think that his engagement has been very scripted. And this was the first time that you've sort of seen somebody able to take him out of the shadow boxing, sort of sparring in the ring moment, and actually he's now in an arena where he's facing people telling him he's wrong. And I thought the engagement, particularly between Blanchette and Carney, showed Carney to have a weak hand.
Absolutely. Okay. And then we do have other clips. I thought that the kind of more interesting parts of the debate were later on. There was a weird exchange where Polyev was talking about, or they were talking about housing, which is a good issue. I wish they spent more time talking about that. But Polyev tried to, Jagmeet Singh tried to say that Polyev didn't have a good record, that he was once the housing minister, and yet he had only built 6 houses.
Yeah.
I don't know what that meant. And Polly was like, no, I built 200,000 homes. And Jagmeet Singh's like, no, you only built 6. Like, I don't really understand. I didn't understand that part. What did you think of that?
Well, I think what's happened, you know, the great thing about debates is that everybody allows their base to like publish a fun meme or, you know, say something kind of snappy, and it gains a life of its own, even if it's a little bit fact free. And what happens, these leaders end up run down. They've got almost no time in the day to think for themselves. They're out there. They repeat things that have a bit of an applause line on the hustings. And then they make the mistake of taking that into an actual debate without actually having the fact base done. And I think Pierre was ready for that, because that is something that I've seen both the Liberals and the NDP using, and it's simply not a smart argument. But it has played poorly, and it actually played very much into Poilievre's hands, because I think that he was able to present himself as a safe pair of hands. He had a couple of moments where he was kind of laughing. You know, there's a bit of engagement on strawberries and other things that, you know, it's quirky, but I think if you look at the dynamics around how this election has evolved, because of the proroguing, he hasn't had much of a chance to get a national platform in the way that he had it before the proroguing. And I think this, in a way, humanized him. Now, naturally, I'm a partisan, I'm a conservative, I want him to win, I want him to look human, I want him to do well. But I would say, even if he wasn't my guy on the stage, I would have thought that he did really well. And I think, you know, I'll talk with a couple Liberal friends after we're done here and say, what did you think? And I think they'll be worried about Carney. My guess is Carney loses between 2 and 4 points on this debate alone.
Wow.
But I think he loses a lot in Quebec. I think Quebec will shift back to the bloc. That's my big prediction. I think it was that bad for him, given what I'm hearing from friends of mine that are in Quebec that I think are very centrist voters. Carney was wooden in critical moments, and he was evasive, particularly on the notwithstanding clause. And I honestly, if I was one of his advisors, I have no idea why he chose to go technocrat on that clause when he knows what's at stake for Quebec. And I think that, you know, his weird sort of idea that, well, you know, Alberta and Saskatchewan, Ontario would also use this, and we have to, I mean, it's just like, of course we would. It's constitutional. And the idea that Quebec can't use it for culture and language, or that would be controversial, is crazy. Pierce was very strong on that, and I think it's going to strengthen his hand in Quebec. And I think that Bloc is going to take votes away from the Liberals. I think this could be the beginning of a shift.
Interesting. I will say, just so the audience knows, so 8:15 is when we're told Mark Carney is going to go. And like I said, Kiambexi's first in line. So folks, this is going to be good. Get some popcorn.
How did he get to the front of the line?
So we're gonna keep an eye on that, and I promise we'll go to it as soon as possible. I obviously am more of the conservative persuasion. I think Pierre, for my ears, did really well. Like, I liked what he was saying, and I think it's great. The reason I said that Blanchette won the debate is because it's Quebec. Like, it's a French language debate, so it's for all Canadians, but really this was a Quebec debate. And I don't know how popular conservative ideas are in Quebec. I'm told not very. I thought the pipeline part was interesting, especially when Pierre Poilievre said that pipelines are popular in Quebec and that people in Quebec support them, which I think is right. I think that obviously there's the environmental crowd in Montreal, and those are the loudest, and those are the people that don't want the pipeline. Others sort of wonder what's in it for Quebec, or, you know, there's risk, but there might not be a benefit. And I think that Poilievre did a pretty good job of explaining why. So I think Poilievre looked fantastic. I didn't like the voice that they had for him. I will say that was like a little pet peeve of mine. I was like, oh, okay, hold on, we have Mark Carney coming up on stage. Okay, let's go to it. Let's switch over to that.
programs, with the numbers that go with them. So, and it's not a question of cutting, it's a question of making the government more productive, and we want to increase government productivity when it comes to operational expenditure. And we can have a discussion over the weekend, and we have about 10 days left in the campaign. Question. Well, I understand, but the debate is a good time to be speaking to a high number of Canadians compared to when you're making announcements. And now, tonight, you talk to us about $500 billion you are planning to invest in Canadian economy. Where does it come from? Answer. Well, it's a combination of investments from the Government of Canada, for instance, the Accelerator Fund in the housing area, or other initiatives and incentives in housing will lead to more investment from the private sector, and we will multiply the government investment by 10. So it's this approach that is necessary in this period of uncertainty at the global level and here in Canada as well. You have to have the courage in the political sense of the term. And as I always say, we are the masters of our own fate. And Mr. Poilievre has picked up on that and is saying the same thing. So we have the opportunity of building the strongest economy in the G7, and I have the plan to do that.
Hi, Mr. Carney, Key and Bexley, Juno News. In your estimation, was Justin Trudeau a good prime minister?
Yeah, Justin Trudeau and the previous administration made a number of contributions to this country. I suspect since I have 10 minutes, I think, right, for the responses, I'm not going to enumerate them all. I'll make one point which I think is relevant on the way looking forward, which is, as I said the other night in an interview, he and I, we share the same values in terms of solidarity, taking care of one another. The emphasis on reconciliation, emphasis on equality of all Canadians, and building a better country for everyone else. The difference, one of the differences, there are many, but one of the differences between the two of us goes to the question I was just asked, which is I put much more emphasis on the economy, on growing the economy. In fact, in this circumstance that we're in, given the scale of the crisis and what needs to be done, I would say a relentless focus on growing the economy to work for all Canadians.
Just to follow up, if I may, your entire campaign does seem to be predicated on putting you in the front and hiding the people that stood in lockstep with Justin Trudeau for the last 10 years. You're kind of hoping that Canadians won't connect the dots, that the people standing behind you in your caucus walked in lockstep with them. Regardless of what you say right now, Stephen Guilbeault made the carbon taxes life work. The man that moved Paul Bernardo from a maximum security prison is now your chief of staff. I'm wondering how you reconcile this and how you can trust their judgment when they thought those ideas were good ideas.
I'd say a couple of things to that rather odd question. First is that the candidates in this election for the Liberal Party, I mean, you go and see when I make an announcement. I don't think I've seen you at any of them, but next time you can come. And you will see a wide range of the candidates that are there presenting themselves. So, for example, with respect to our announcement on crime, we had Bill Blair, now the Minister of Defense, of course, formerly the Chief of Police and a long time in Toronto, and Natalie Provost, who is a new candidate. We're honored to have her, and someone who's dedicated their life to helping to end gun violence and violence against women. There is a very wide range of candidates that have come to the party with me. There's a lot of fresh blood. There's also a lot of experience that's there, and you need that combination of energy, new ideas, experience, and a fundamental passion for making this country better in order to serve at this crucial time. Thank you very much.
Question en français.
Question?
Émilie Bergeron, La Presse canadienne. Vous avez dit durant le débat que vous voulez...
You said during the debate that you want to introduce a cap on immigration in all categories. Mr. Trudeau had already taken steps to reduce annual numbers in terms of immigration. Answer. Well, my thinking is more in line in terms of keeping the levels where they are currently for a long period of time, and in the meantime, increasing our capacity of welcoming
if I may, the various
people.
measures or levels of the different classes of immigration as roughly as they are today. So it's not, as the question was, a further reduction, but we probably are going to need them to keep them at those levels for longer until we have built up our capacity to welcome, which means housing, language formation, other factors.
En suivi sur, vous avez dit que vous voulez une augmentation de la production.
You said that you wanted to increase oil production and that you're open to pipeline projects from west to east. Well, it can take years to build a pipeline. How are you going to present this as a way for Canada to be more independent than the US if it takes years to build? Answer. I mean, there are different aspects of this question. If our relationship with the U.S. is there's an upheaval in that relationship, and it is the case, as you said, this reflects on the medium term. And secondly, in Canada, we have this option, and that will only strengthen our hand in the negotiations with the President of the U.S., and that is useful right now.
We can keep the answers and question very short, please.
Absolutely. Alex Zoltan with True North. If you thought my friend's question was odd, you're going to love this one.
I'm glad you self-assessed that. Okay.
How many genders are there?
In terms of sex, there are 2. Thank you.
My follow-up question then, do you believe that women, biological women, have the right to their own spaces, their own sports, their own change rooms, their own prisons, their own homeless shelters?
I think this is Canada, and that as a general objective, yes, but we work in where we value all Canadians for who they are, and we'll continue to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, merci.
Okay.
Wow. Okay. So we got 2 questions to Mr. Carney, and interesting. I think that Kian Bexy's question really caught him off guard, and he didn't quite know what to say about Justin Trudeau because, I mean, I don't think he was expecting that question at all. And as far as Alex Sultan's, I mean, again, wow, really caught him off guard. David, can you hear me? What did you think of that?
Yeah, I thought those guys shone. You know, we need more of that in Canadian media. We've got those are the questions that people are actually asking around their dinner table. That's what people talk about right now. People actually have a huge debate around what's happening with this trans madness. The High Court in the UK has just determined women are biological. That happened yesterday, right? Yeah. There's been enormous debate around this issue. People are tired of seeing little girls hurt by men in sports that have different biology. And, you know, the guys have just put their finger on it. And I love Alex Hilton's self-deprecating way of setting up this question, saying, you know, I know that you may not appreciate the question or you might find it crazy, but that's where people live their life. And I think one of the things people forget about elections is that they pivot not just on they pivot on hearts and minds. And the minds issues are the economy, trade, how you manage Trump, immigration, you know, the issues of cost of living, et cetera. But the hard issues are the issues where people look at what's happening around them and they decide, can my wife or girlfriend walk through the street to meet me at a restaurant tonight, or is that just too dangerous? Are the streets just not walkable like they are in so many other countries, right? And can my kid go to school without being told that he might have been born in the wrong body and that there's some kind of surgical process for dealing with gender dysphoria rather than being encouraged to connect with his parents and connect to people that can help him through that process. Those are the things that actually really move people, because they're asking a simple question. Is this the country that I want my kids to inherit? Right? And on the economy stuff, you don't want your kids to inherit all kinds of debt that the boomer grandparents are going to pass on to them. But on the cultural stuff, that's the thing that really actually moves people. That's the stuff that keeps people up at night. And
Well,
I
it's
think
interesting too,
those
because those were the questions that we didn't get in the debate, right? Like Kian's question was put him on the spot about Justin Trudeau, right? Remember this happened with Kamala Harris. She was on The View. It was like a safe interview during the 2024 US election. And she was just asked, like, what would you do differently than Biden? And she didn't have a good answer. She stuttered. She said, I think we just saw something quite similar to that with Mark Carney, because he it's like he wasn't prepped for that question, right? And so he just gave his honest answer, which was, I love Justin Trudeau. I believe everything that he does. We have the same vision of Canada, which, as Jordan Peterson laid out very well in his video critique of Mark Carney, their vision of Canada and their values are not Canadian values. They're leftist utopian values.
Question in French, please.
Okay, we'll go to Jagmeet Singh, and then we'll continue the conversation.
You have been an MP for the last 6 years. Now you're entitled to a retirement. Before that, you were a provincial MP. In other words, the majority of your career has been at the expense of taxpayers, but you chose to boycott conservatives and right-leaning media such as ours, and you supported Justin Trudeau's bill that aimed to censor the internet. So why do you think that it's ethically acceptable to marginalize conservatives and refuse to treat them with respect? Answer: I do not answer questions from Rebel News because it's an organization that spreads disinformation. So I'm not going to answer your question, but I will take the time to say that what's key in this election for me is this question of who's going to fight for you and who's going to defend what's important for you. Healthcare, for instance, who's going to defend the interests of everyday Canadians and not just CEOs. And we have major companies who are scamming people. Question: you are banned from the Indian territory for your policies, but here in Canada you support censorship and words that you think are unacceptable, especially through censorship online, and you actually refuse to answer questions from journalists with whom you do not agree, as you have just done. So you should be punished in one way or another, is the impression that leaves. So how are you different than people who would put you in prison? Answer: that is another example of why I do not answer questions from Rebel News, because you are spreading disinformation, and your question is an example of this.
Good evening, Mr. Singh.
Do you really want it in English? I could do it if you want. No, you're just joking.
Next question, please.
Kate McKenna from CBC News. Your party and the other parties haven't released costed platforms. How can we have an honest debate about your promises when voters can't see how you'll pay for them?
Well, we're the only party that has actually laid out clear examples of how we would raise money. We talked about ending offshore tax havens, enforcing the Canada Revenue Agency to get the money that we're owed. There's billions and billions, tens of billions of dollars that we're owed that we're not receiving because of a lack of enforcement. So we've laid out clear ways that we would increase revenue. We've also talked about things that we would cut. We would cut offshore tax havens, but we'd also cut fossil fuel subsidies and private consultants, and instead rely on our civil servants. So we've laid out some of the real ways that we would do that, whereas the Conservatives are very clear what they're going to do. They're going to cut the services that people need. They've laid that out. And we've also seen that sadly, Mr. Carney's also talked about cutting services, and his plan to balance the operating budget in 3 years would mean $43 billion in cuts. And so if you want someone that's going to stand up and fight back against those cuts, hold the Liberals to account. You need to send New Democrats to Ottawa like you did before, and we were able to deliver dental care and pharmacare. Send more New Democrats again to Ottawa, and we will fight back against these cuts.
You spoke the least this evening of all of the leaders. I'm wondering how you feel about how you did tonight, whether you were able to communicate your message to French-speaking Canadians.
Well, ultimately, the difference wasn't as big, but initially I was worried about it. But I'm really proud that I was able to make the case to Canadians, to Quebecers, to French-speaking Canadians, that what New Democrats are going to do is stand up for what matters most to you. I made it a point to stand up for healthcare because it is so fundamental to who we are as a country. We fundamentally believe that we should take care of each other, and healthcare represents that value. So I raised that. I talked about how we can make life more affordable by putting a price cap on essential food items like other countries have done. I talked about how we can stop big corporations, corporate landlords from buying up affordable homes. I laid out how we would take the GST off of your monthly bills like cell phone and internet and give people a real break. And so in this difficult time, the question in this election is who's going to actually fight for you, not the billionaires, and sending more New Democrats to Ottawa. Voting for us is how you have someone on your side fighting for you.
Question en français.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh, Christian Noël de Radio-Canada.
Question.
On vous a entendu parler de
You
traitement équitable de la part du modérateur.
spoke about
modérateur dans le débat.
Equal treatment from the moderator. Why did you go after moderator in the debate? Answer. Well, I was very passionate at that point in time, but I spoke to Mr. Roy afterwards. There's no issue. I just wanted to talk about healthcare services, something that saved my father's life and something I used when I was studying law. So I think it's fundamental that we defend healthcare and healthcare services. It's very personal to me, so I'm very passionate about that. And I had the opportunity of sharing to what extent it's important because we're faced with a crisis, and it's a crisis that we can fix. And I think people in Quebec, people across the country now know how important that is for me and how I can defend something that's key for me. Question. In the debate, you accused Pierre Poilievre of wanting to privatize healthcare. What evidence do you have? Answer. Well, first of all, he proposes to make cuts in healthcare and in the programs that we need so much. And just like all other conservatives, when you look at their record in every province where you have conservatives who are allies of Pierre Poilievre, such as Danielle Smith. For instance, Danielle Smith is in the process of massively privatizing the healthcare system in Alberta, and she is allowing private companies to take up space in healthcare. So that is one thing they do. And Mr. Poilievre is continuing the same tradition. So he's proposing massive cuts in healthcare, and these cuts will accelerate privatization.
Hello, Mr. Singh. Drea Humphrey with Rebel News. Your party takes great pride in standing against hate such as white supremacy, Islamophobia, and online...
Sorry, I didn't get your outlet.
Drea Humphrey with Rebel News.
Okay.
Your party...
You know where I'm going to go with this, all right?
Can I speak?
Yeah, you can. I'm just going to say you know where I'm going to go with it, though.
Your party takes pride in standing against hate such as white supremacy, Islamophobia, and online hate speech. Yet you stay silent about ongoing attacks against Christians, even after Conservative MP Jamil Javani's order paper question revealed that over 200 churches have been targeted by arson and vandalism since claims of remains being discovered at former residential schools swept the nation in 2021. These claims have been disproven by bands that excavated and remain unproven by those that have not. Will you condemn the rise in acts of hate against Christians today and explain what your party will do moving forward to keep Christians safe from hate in Canada?
Again, thank you, but I'm not going to respond to an organization that promotes misinformation and disinformation like Rebel News, so no, I'm not going to respond to your question.
Please keep the questions and answers short. We're just getting up to the time.
Perhaps you didn't hear me. Over 200 Christian places of worship have been attacked in Canada since 2021. Many served First Nations communities, many were historic, and they diverted police and resources and put others at risk. What do you say to Canadians who see your refusal to answer, especially from one of the few media outlets here that are not funded by the state, as proof that a vote for you is a vote for a dangerous radical party that gaslights the public into thinking it stands against hate, when its silence is instead emboldening
Great question.
Christophobia?
Your question is another example of why I don't respond to agencies like Rebel News that promote misinformation and disinformation.
Très rapidement, une question en français et une suivie avec des réponses courtes, s'il vous plaît.
Question in French. Question.
Pour quel organisme?
For what
La
outlet?
Converse.
C'est un média indépendant à Montréal.
It's an independent outlet in Montreal.
Plusieurs organismes qui militent pour les demandeurs d'asile, incluant
Many
Amnesty International,
organizations,
disent que le Canada
including
devrait se
Amnesty
retirer
International,
de l'entente
think
des
that
tiers
Canada
pays
should
tiers
withdraw
pays
from the
La
Third
Cour suprême
Safe
des
Country
États-Unis a jugé que la
Agreement,
limitation de
and the
Trump
U.S.
avait
Supreme
accusé
Court
illégalement un
considers
résident
that the
permanent
Trump
et planifié de
administration
continuer sur cette lancée,
has taken
considérant
illegal
durant sa
steps
visite, planifiez-vous
in
de
this
retirer le Canada
area.
de
So,
l'entente
do you
tiers
plan
pays?
to withdraw Canada from this agreement on
C'est une défi,
safe
Nathan,
third
parce que je ne
countries?
sais pas
Answer.
si vous êtes...
Well, I'm faced with a conundrum here
Il y a
because I don't
d'autres journalistes que je crois,
quite
donc,
know.
peut-être,
Okay, there's
je
another
donne un
journalist that I
Je pense
trust
que la
here,
question,
so
c'est
I
une
will
question
answer
de
your
compassion.
question.
On a,
I think
si
it's
on
a
parle
question about being
de la
compassionate.
la personne, le fait qu'on a des gens qui
If
essaient
there
de
are people
traverser
in
la
situations of
frontière parce qu'ils
crises
ont
and
peur
people
que
are crossing
qui
the
va
border
arriver
because they are
États-Unis, on
afraid
doit montrer
about
la
what might
compassion
happen to
dans
them
notre
in the
réponse.
US, then we have
Je
to be
pense que
compassionate
le
towards them.
président, le gouvernement
I think
fédéral n'a pas
it's
bien
the federal
financé
government
ou donné les ressources
hasn't been
suffisants
funding or providing the
pour
necessary
aider à
resources
traverser la
to
pays,
help
accueillir des gens qui traversent de manière
welcome
illégale.
people
J'ai dit
who
dans le
are
passé qu'on
crossing
doit
the border
suspendre
illegally.
l'entente
I've said in the
tiers, bien
past
sûr,
that
parce
we
que
need to
avec la
suspend the
situation dans laquelle on se
safe
retrouve avec
third
tout ce qui
safe
se
country
passe aux
agreement
États-Unis avec Donald Trump,
because
avec
we
qui
are
brise
aware of
les
what's
droits de la
happening in the
personne
US
souvent,
with Donald Trump, and he's
malheureusement avec
violating
le
people's
siège
rights.
de Cour suprême
And
ignore la décision.
there is, when there's a decision of the Supreme Court, for instance, he completely ignores it and puts people in danger. So we have to be compassionate, and I maintain my position about suspending the agreement. This was the last question.
Thank you.
Well, Jagmeet Singh just completely embarrassed himself there, right? So you had two women asking very good questions, very interesting, well-researched, well-thought-out questions, and he just has this weird policy.
1 minute.
He has this weird policy where it's just like, I refuse to talk to you. It makes him look very small and petty. I want to go back, though, to Mark Carney, because I can see on social media the sort of usual voices in legacy media, people like Andrew Coyne, are very bothered by the fact that True North and Juno News were able to ask questions. Well, guess what, Andrew Coyne? This is a free country. This is a democracy. And yes, we have independent media. Our questions are different than the legacy media. And that is by design, right? You ask the same boring questions that were already covered in the debate. Every legacy media question is just rehashing something that we already heard about over the last 2 hours. True North, Juno News, and The Rebel have different questions. We cover a different perspective. We represent a different subset of Canadians. And the fact that Mark Carney could not answer our questions, right? He stumbled and bumbled his way through Keehan's response. He couldn't decide whether he wanted to differentiate himself from Justin Trudeau. The first 20 seconds of his response was absolutely brutal. And it wasn't until later that he got up. And on genders, he didn't actually provide a good answer. But the fact that he was stumbling and bumbling, again, showed that he was caught off guard, which is good. That's what you want of your leaders. That's the point of journalists. Okay, Pierre Poilievre is on.
The French language outside of Quebec. Are you talking about expanding, and you talk about expanding access to immersion, but what do you think about hundreds of Francophone children who don't have a place for themselves in schools because we are not building a sufficient number of Francophone schools outside of Quebec? So will you support the construction of schools? Answer. Thank you. This is a very good question. I had the opportunity of going to a French immersion school where my father also taught. So this is something that is very important to me, and I know that there's a lot of demand. But at the end of the day, it's a provincial area of competence. So it's up to them to decide what schools are going to be built in what communities, but I'm open to fully collaborating with the provinces to make sure that more spaces are available. But what I had in mind actually is about an announcement we already shared on immersion opportunities, which would allow young adolescents to go to Quebec, to Saguenay, and to other places where there is a high concentration of French, where they would only have the option of speaking French. They would do that for 5 weeks. When I was about 20 years old, I had the opportunity to do something along those lines, and we would double such programs to allow young Francophones to go to Quebec and to take part in these immersion programs so that they speak the French language better. Thank you. Question. Francophone immigration outside of Quebec, Mr. Carney announced their target going from 10 to 12%. What's your objective? What's your target? Answer. I think it's a reasonable level. I agree with him on that, and our party has already announced that we are in favor of increasing the number of Francophone immigrants who come to Canada but who end up settling outside of Quebec, so that we can add to the demographic weight and strengthen the French language. So we will work hand in hand with the different communities to increase the number of Francophones who are coming to Canada to make it their country. Thank you.
Sheila Gunn-Reid for Rebel News.
Yes.
We've seen the NDP tonight refuse to take questions from independent journalists. The Liberals have gone one step further. The Carney campaign has called the police on independent journalists. Trudeau before that brought in C-18, C-11. The Liberals are promising a revamped version of the Online Harms Act. What would a Conservative government do to ensure the independence of the press and protect Canadians' right to have access to information and hold their politicians to account?
We are the only party that's willing to protect freedom of the press, of all the media. And we will also repeal C-11, the censorship law. We will remove the censorship of Canadian news on web platforms like Facebook and Instagram. We will fight back against any kind of Orwellian online censorship law like the one that the previous Liberal government instituted. It was designed to create the possibility of preemptive arrests of people, where you could be arrested if you were suspected of sometime in the future planning to say something harmful online. You could be under a peace bond. I mean, it really is Orwellian. And I note that many people across the spectrum have spoken out against this censorship. Even someone like Margaret Atwood, not known to be a conservative, has said that this kind of censorship is not only bad for democracy, but inhibits artistic expression. So I stand for free speech, and we will respect the right of Canadians to have access to the media that they choose.
My follow-up, Canada's suffering the most violent anti-Semitic crime wave in history.
Yes.
There have been shootings, firebombings, even a riot right here in Montreal. But not all of this anti-Semitic hatred and incitement rises to the high level of a criminal code offense. Do you believe that foreign nationals, that is, people who are not Canadian citizens, should be deported for participating in these hate marches or other pro-Hamas activities that don't rise to the level of a crime?
Well, what I have said is when there is a crime involved, including crimes of vandalism, that visitors to Canada should be deported. You simply can't come here and firebomb a Jewish bakery or someone's home or smash windows out of a political riot and expect to stay in this country if you are on a visitor visa. We will be bringing in tougher laws to penalize those who are permanent residents and citizens who break laws and harm our communities. But look, this is the disintegration we have witnessed after the lost Liberal decade. Everybody is divided. This group is divided against that group. There is crime and chaos in our streets. The Liberals have promoted this division by saying one thing to one group and then exactly the opposite to a different group. We had a tradition in this country before this government where you could come from places, the conflict-ridden places in the world, and you would leave the fight behind. You might have a debate about the politics of that place when you sat down in a coffee shop in Montreal or Toronto, but it never overflowed into street violence. We need to get back to that. You should know, we welcome people to this country. Sure, bring your culture, bring your traditions, bring your family, but do not bring foreign conflicts onto our streets. We're going to have peaceful streets again, and we're going to be united. All of us should consider ourselves Canadian first and put foreign divisions behind us.
Thank you for taking my
Question en
question.
français, s'il vous plaît. Please keep your questions and answers short. Thank you.
Christopher Curtis, The Rover. Mr. Poliev, plus tôt ce soir, Jagmeet Singh
Question. Mr. Poliev, Jagmeet Singh referred to what's happening in Gaza and said that it's a genocide. I understand that that's not your opinion, but the government of Israel is talking about emptying Gaza of Palestinians. So can you at least call that ethnic cleansing? Can you even criticize Israel? Answer, we of course can criticize anyone, but let us not forget that Hamas attacked Israel without provocation, with the sole purpose of killing and violating Israel and the highest number of civilians possible. So this was an invasion by Hamas, which was not provoked. And unfortunately, there's a lot of suffering among Palestinians, but the blame belongs to Hamas. They are doing everything they can to extend the conflict. So I reject the approach adopted by Mr. Singh. We will remain allies and fight against terrorism. Question. Well, bombs have been dropped on every university in Gaza. There is no longer a functional hospital, and people need everything. So can you criticize Israel at the very least for what they have done? Answer. Well, in a situation where you have a terrorist group who crosses a border to deliberately target children, women, and civilians, a country has no choice but to defend itself. Now, should that country take every measure to avoid other civilian tragedies? Absolutely. But Hamas wants to maximize the number of Palestinians who end up dying. So that is their objective. They're maximizing the sufferance of the Palestinian people.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, David, I know you have to jump off in a few minutes. I'm going to try to get Cian Bexley to jump on, but I just want to inform the audience of the total meltdown that is happening online and on the CBC. I don't think we're able to clip and show, but Rosemary Barton on the CBC was very up in arms with the fact that True North asked that question, and we're seeing the meltdown.
2 minutes.
So, David, what do you think?
I think it's fantastic. Honestly, this debate and these questions are renewing my sense of a civic culture of debate and open discussion in Canada. It's exactly what Canadians need and want. There's just far too much that happens in the country that hasn't been addressed. I didn't know, and I consider myself well informed. I didn't know that 200 churches have been vandalized or burned. I didn't know it was that extreme. And to watch,
we track it. You can go to Arson Tracker, Arson. What is the URL? Anyway, if you go to Juno News, we have a tab, and Cosmin Georgia has been tracking it for the last 3 years, and his report has gone like it's like the most viewed thing ever on True North. It's got like tens of millions of views, and it's featured on like CNN and all just like we were the ones doing that. But yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Look, I just think around the dinner table, if the purpose of debate in a civil society is to force people to have hard conversations about what kind of culture they want to live in, what kind of society they want to live in. The issues that were raised by independent media are far closer to the conversations people are going to have around their dinner table tonight. And I think that I expect the mainstream media to melt down, because as their grip is loosened, even in a moment like this, basic questions about transgenderism, basic questions about a double standard when it comes to racism or the protection of Christians versus Islamophobia, which is a sort of pet sort of commentary from the left. You know, those notions are the things that people care about, talk about, and want their country to reflect. And I think that the fact that they've been raised is fantastic. I expect to see a meltdown by mainstream media because they're losing power. And part of the reason they're losing power is because they're not asking some of those hard questions. They're not challenging this bizarre lack of evidence around the residential school issues. They're not challenging the fact that these churches are being burnt down, and they're not challenging the double standards of some of these political leaders. Jagmeet Singh did himself probably the biggest disservice I've ever seen a politician do to himself in the way that he reacted to the two women. I think it was Lavoie, and then the other one.
Lavoie and Drea, yeah.
Yeah, and I just think his contempt for the importance of those questions. He had the right to say, look, typically I don't respond to the Rebel News because I don't like the way they cut questions. I think it's misinformation. You raise an important point. Here's the way I want to respond to it. There were graceful ways to accept the premise of the question, respond to it without, and while still making the point that he wanted to make, that Rebel News wasn't his favorite outlet. But he showed himself to be intellectually insecure and actually not a leader, not in this country, not respectful enough of people and the questions they had to ask. So I loved it. So far, terrific debate. I think Pierre is the winner coming out of this.
Yeah, I agree. And I thought that he had a great answer for Sheila Gunn Reid, who had a great question as well. And I love the fact that independent media are allowed, because interestingly, when Mark Carney was answering Kian Bexy's question, right? So I thought he was going to be number one. There's two lineups, right? The way it works is there's two lineups and two mics, and we don't know which one's going to go. So he was at the front of one lineup. The one was on the front of the other. So he got to answer the question. And Mark Carney clearly didn't know who he was. And so he answered, and he actually, I seemed to think that it was a good question, because he said, I don't recognize you. You haven't been at my other press conferences. And he kind of gave him a little invitation. I'll have to go back and watch exactly what he said. But he basically invited Kian to come back to future press conferences, which is interesting because obviously it's his people that are blocking independent journalists from coming. And so the media get up in arms about the fact that we are able, we've got Kian here, so let's go to him.
Question.
Kian, tell us what's happening in Montreal.
Hey, I'm just standing outside of the venue. The CBC is running this operation, so they have banned us from actually reporting inside the venue, which is really frustrating. So we're standing outside with no equipment calling into the show. What's interesting, though, is if you look over my shoulder right here, in these tents, you have Rosemary Barton right now, absolutely seething that so many conservative or independent journalists, even, I mean, a lot of these people weren't really conservatives. I'll get out of the wind here because it's quite windy here. A lot of these independent journalists asked great questions, really, really thoughtful questions from Rebel News as well. Drea, Sheila, they asked some of the most topical questions of the night, including Alex from True North, who asked, it's one of those classic gotcha questions. How many genders are there? But then he followed it up with a really, really substantive question about what's happening to women in women's sports, in women's prisons even. So I think that if we didn't have independent media here, we would have lost a lot. I asked Mark Carney a pretty clear question about the people that are standing behind him. And how they're virtually identical to Justin Trudeau's legion of liberals, and how he can sort of stand behind that and defend their ideology, their ideas and beliefs, and sort of pretend like he's changed Stephen Guilbeault's mind on carbon taxes, which he obviously hasn't. Someone who climbs the CN Tower to protest in favor of locking down the country to stop climate change is not someone who just changes their mind because there's a new leader in town. I'm sure maybe cynically to grab more power and to consolidate that and to secure another 4 years. But in the second year of their term, you know exactly what's going to happen. In fact, I can't remember the name of the specific Liberal. It was an Ontario Liberal candidate that just said today that she couldn't promise that the carbon tax wouldn't come back in the next term, that this wasn't the end of the carbon tax, it was just a pause, which is absolutely outrageous, but pretty obvious if you come to think about it, that leopards don't really change their stripes. Even though Mark Carney is trying to pretend like they're a different band of politicians than Justin Trudeau had following him around as he destroyed the country, it's the same people, the same problems, the same policies that destroyed this country.
Well, maybe you can remember a bit better than I did, but it seemed like Mark Carney invited you to come back to future press conferences. Did you catch him say something like that?
Yeah, he said something along the lines of that. I'm definitely going to keep trying. But of course, yeah, that was the one takeaway, was that he said he hasn't seen me around much, which is a little bit surprising because he called the police on me at his campaign launch, which is just, Canadians understand what he's doing. He's gaslighting. He is a gaslighter. I was going to ask him a question about Ghislaine Maxwell and how friendly he is. I sent Ghislaine a letter in prison, actually, to talk to her about Mark Carney's weird, strange history with her, where they end up rolling around in the grass together in London and spending a lot of time together. I thought I'll take it easy on Mark, but he treated me quite poorly. I asked him a pretty fair question. Was Justin Trudeau a good prime minister? That's something that Pierre Poilievre would be able to answer pretty clearly about Stephen Harper. But Mark Carney just waffled in a lot of ums, a lot of ahs, and he didn't really have an answer to the question, which I thought was pretty fair given my history of some pointed questions that I usually ask politicians. I gave it to him easy, and then the follow-up was a little bit harder, of course, but I had to be the way he was treating me. I think that it's fair that we sting him a bit with some questions that the CBC would never ask.
Well, exactly, right? So when the legacy media showed up to the mic after the debates, they asked the same questions that we had already covered in the debates, right? The debates talked a lot about the costing of the platforms, a lot about the environment, like it covered immigration, and yet they just asked the same questions, whereas it was the independent press. I love the fact that there were such an array of voices. There were a couple of independent outlets that I had never heard of before asking questions. I don't think that they were all conservative. I think a couple of them were French language. A couple of them were probably even on the left. And that's fantastic. And it's just so interesting to see the media melting down. Now, I know it's quite cold for you, Kian, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. But any sort of final takeaway thoughts you want to share with the audience here? Oh, it looks like we might have lost audio.
I think that the real debate, I hope you can hear me, the real debate is going to be tomorrow. I always find it so funny that we pretend to be a bilingual country. It's only really a bilingual country here in Quebec. It's the only people that really care about tonight's debate. Of course, there's people like in the bubble, like you and I, and our viewers who care deeply about politics and the state of the country, but most people in Vancouver are not tuning in tonight. So tomorrow it's going to be big. We're going to be making sure to ask some pretty tough questions tomorrow as well. I guess we'll have to see what happens in that debate. Pierre was obviously quite feisty today. I think I haven't watched the show yet that you guys have been hosting here today, so I don't know what your thoughts were on it, but I thought that Pierre did pretty well. Bias aside, obviously I think Conservatives perform better than Liberals on an average day, but I think he did really well. I think Mark Carney really failed. From the French people that I spoke with and from the translators that were really struggling to keep up, I don't think Mark Carney really resonated with the French language that his campaign thought, or at least hoped that he would. But I'm willing to be persuaded one way or the other. That's just my initial thoughts from what I saw.
Yeah, I think we tend to agree. I think that Pierre held his own, and from my perspective, what he was saying was completely right, other than the last bit on abortion, but everything else I was right there for. I think for the French audience, though, I thought that Francois Blanchette did really well, and our audience poll on YouTube said that Pierre Poilievre wiped the floor. I think he got 90%. David, I know you have to jump off, so did you want to make any final statements before we wrap it up here?
Well, first to Kian, way to go. This is what Canadians have been looking for. You do so much hard work just to get yourself into the lineup. I don't know what tricks you had to pull to do that, but I know there's a backstory and I'd love to hear about it. But, as a Canadian that thinks that there's a lot to play for, a lot to fight for, a lot to talk about in this country, seeing you get up there and ask that question and make the point, just so encouraging. This is what the nation needs more of. Of course, Rosemary Barton and Andrew Coyne and others that have had these legacy positions, they're boring, they're largely unwatched, and it's this that creates vibrancy, but it also creates what we were talking about before. This is what people really want to talk about around the kitchen table. There's a lot of people that feel like they're losing their country as they see churches burn and police disinterested in finding out who did it. There's a lot of people that think that the scandal of this academic fraud that blamed the churches for missing persons and residential stuff that has never been called out and is actually being treated as hate speech in some quarters is just wrong, and it's a violation of kind of ethics. Transgenderism is something we have to debate. All of those things are verboten for people like Rosemary Barton and Andrew Coyne, but they're what everybody actually cares about in the country and wants to talk about, because this is the country their kids are going to inherit. So kudos to you to get to the front of the line. And I just couldn't be happier to see that debate. I thought the debate was excellent. It was free form. I thought the host did a great job of allowing people to engage. And I think that independent media came out in a huge way on this, and I'm glad that traditional media is going to melt down. And I'm hoping they melt
Thanks
down.
for saying that. I appreciate it. You're absolutely right. There's a lot of toying around that goes into the behind the scenes of getting in line first. It's something I pride myself in, is being able to weasel my way in before anyone realizes that a line is forming, and then it's too late. The lineup was 30 people long. So it was a very, I got in there with Alex. We sort of had planned out how we were going to get in there and make the line instead of waiting for the line, and that ended up working out. And seeing the legacy journalists like Justin Ling in the back just seething that they weren't going to get a question in was really satisfying. And you talk about Rosemary Barton, and I pointed out the little cabana that she's in right now talking with all of her friends in the CBC. If you want some entertainment tonight, I really recommend watching some reruns of their responses to independent journalists' questions. I've been getting texts all night about how Rosemary Barton was just seething, losing her mind, that so many evil conservatives were asking questions. It's going to be some good watching with popcorn. And when I go back to my hotel, I'm surely going to be watching a lot of that.
That's
great. But I got to get going.
Yeah,
thank
all
you
right.
guys very much.
Thanks so much for your time, man, and go warm up, and we'll have you back on tomorrow. Thanks. And David, I believe you have to go too, so I appreciate your time. Is there any? I don't know if you have to jump off right now, if you want to.
I've got 5 more minutes.
Okay.
This was great coverage, Candice. But kudos to you and Kian at being able to take a moment like this and expand the horizon of people's thinking on these issues. I think it's been a really tough election to watch as a conservative, because I feel like so many of the things that really are worthy of debate have kind of been pushed aside by the framing that's happened with the proroguing of Parliament. The control over the media has meant that mainstream media is worried about a conservative win, and that's kind of added to the constraints, I think, on the Poilievre campaign. There's been conservative infighting, which we do all the time anyway as conservatives. That have had taken a toll. But I feel like this debate marked a bit of a turning point on a couple key issues, and certainly a turning point for the role independent media has taken in reframing the kinds of conversations that are going to happen around the country. And I think all of that is going to set up here to have a different kind of week. And I think Carney is going to wake up on the wrong side of some Quebec polls, and I think that's going to put pressure on his Ontario game. I think the outcome, so 3 things from this. One, I think this was Blanchette's night, and I think he's going to win some seats back in Quebec, and that's going to hurt the Liberals. 2, I think it was Poilievre's night, number 2, and he's going to be seen in a different light by an important constituency. I think he, is going to have a chance to redeem himself with boomers and with women on the way some of these debates went, but I expect to see more of that. And I think that Ontario dynamic, the 905, what happens with Doug Ford, et cetera, is going to become an important part of what happens the next 2 weeks. But I think we'll see what happens with the polls, but I think we'll have to get another show going here soon, because my guess is they're going to shift, and we're going to be in, 2 to 3 point differences tied all the way into probably a minority party either direction.
I sense that you're right. We did think that going into this election that it could have been a landslide for the Conservatives, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. But I don't think it's over. I think it's incredibly close. We had a poll out today done in-house by our Juno News pollsters, and it's within a point or two. So Pierre has made up any of the lead that he may have lost throughout the campaign. And I think you're right. I think that Carney had a bad night tonight. I don't know that very many Canadians are watching these debates. Interestingly, some of the independent streamers had really big numbers. I noticed Viva Fry on X had like 13,000 people watching. Northern Perspective on YouTube at one point had like 10 or 11,000. The Pleb had 6 or 7,000 as well. I think we had maybe two and a half, so pretty respectable. But like, not huge numbers. I suspect they'll be bigger tomorrow. But the thing is, these things get clipped, right? And those little moments go far. And that's why I think that the questions that we ask are interesting, because they're already starting to prompt conversations on social media, and they're just different than the questions legacy media asks. So, whether you like them or not, it's like the fact that Carney couldn't really answer either of the questions, right? He bumbled through whether Trudeau was a good prime minister, and that was telling, that he felt very uncomfortable answering that question. And then same with the gender thing, like he didn't actually answer the question. He said when it comes to sexes too, right? But that's not the question. And then when it came to women's only spaces, he just kind of gave boilerplate, like stumbled his way through as fast as he could and then got out. So the fact that he was deeply uncomfortable, obviously he hadn't prepped at all for those kind of questions, which again there's value to that, right? Like that's the point of journalists, to ask tough questions. Like, you might hate the questions, but the job is to ask tough questions. And I think that both True North, Alex Zoltan, and Juno's Kian Bexey just accomplished that goal exactly. And it was unfortunate that the rebel questions from Drea Humphreys and Alexa Dois refused to be answered by Jagmeet Singh. But again, that really reveals his character, right? He's been doing this shtick, I think, for 3 elections now. And people are like, okay, so you don't like these female reporters, like that's sort of a bad reflection on you.
It's a closed-minded, dogmatic, ideological position by somebody who's intellectually threatened by 2 bright women asking hard questions about real issues that people care about. So, and this is the classic move by the left. This is why no one trusts the left when they say they want to pass laws against misinformation, because what he showed in the way he reacted to those people is he considers other people's legitimate questions about his perspectives as a political leader in this country to be beyond the pale simply by their affiliation with the platform that's asking those questions. That's the kind of guy that wants the legal right to determine what's misinformation in this country. No, thank you. Right. And he's illustrated why we can't trust people with that kind of language and those kinds of legal.
Well, and it's kind of interesting because at some point in the campaign, the left, the CBC, they were trying to take aim at Pierre Poilievre for not answering enough questions for legacy media. Pierre Poilievre would never do that and has never done that. Just like knock down saying like, I refuse to answer a question from the CBC. Like, no, he will actually take a step further and embarrass the journalists by showing how little they know about the topic. So if Jagmeet Singh wanted to like flex his intellectualism and say, I don't like the rebel, and this is why, and I'm going to dissect your question and tell you the 7 reasons why it's an illegitimate question. That would actually, I would respect that. Now, of course, he can't do that because the questions were well researched and they were intellectual and they were real questions. And Jagmeet Singh probably doesn't have the capacity to go through them and dissect them like that. But he quite embarrassed himself. And it's interesting that the media has this. We had another journalist there who didn't ask the questions, but he sent us a video note, and we're not going to play it, but he said that basically inside, any time that a leader was taking a shot at Pierre Poilievre, that the journalists were all like kind of cheering and laughing. Like they, politics is like it's like sports, spectator sport. And the journalists were like openly, emotionally showing their disdain for Pierre Poilievre during the debate, mocking him, laughing him. And so, they expected that all the other journalists were like on their team, and they didn't really quite realize that some of the people in there were independent journalists who were actually like, that in and of itself is news. The fact that these journalists are like scoffing and laughing at Pierre Poilievre and like happy when a tough question gets asked at him, and like they've been exposed to just be total partisan frauds, in my opinion.
Absolutely. No, they wear the same color jersey right under their outfit. They're wearing Team Liberal Party NDP jerseys. They have a vested personal interest, and this is typical of the press, which is what makes independent press so important, because it's okay for there to be hard left journalists. I don't mind if there's a Marxist journalist that wants to ask a question of Jagmeet Singh or Pierre Poilievre. That's what makes society strong. If you don't know how to respond to a question from someone that believes the state should own everything, then you shouldn't be a political leader in a country that has people that have that viewpoint. Because the laws you have to pass will have to deal with that viewpoint and point out why that viewpoint is horrible for humanity, right? Like, you've got to understand those things. And that's what creates strength in any society. And I think I just feel incredibly proud of it's Juno and True North and Rebel showed up and asked great questions, hard questions, and they showed by asking those questions what a guy like Jagmeet Singh is made of. You know, the illustration, the fact that he couldn't answer, the fact that he tried to grandstand his non-answers has painted him into a corner and reduced him completely as an individual that hopes to lead. So terrific.
Absolutely.
Terrific night,
Well,
terrific for the country, terrific for independent media, and a great debate. The hosts should be very proud of themselves. One of my favorite points, by the way, was I've got a lot of friends internationally, and they'll sort of, you know, they'll key into something, and I think if you keyed into that debate and saw the seriousness with which it was announced that because there's a hockey game on tonight, we're pushing the debate forward. I mean, it's just there's something
so
close.
stereotypically Canadian, isn't it?
It's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I made a TikTok about that, but I was saying I don't think we're a real country when the hockey game supersedes democracy. But you know,
Maybe
it
that's
is what it is.
than we think. That might mean we've got, you know, less to worry about than we think, if that's allowed.
Fair enough. That's a good point. That's a good point. All right, David. Well, I really appreciate having you on. Hopefully, we'll have you back. I think you're going to join us again tomorrow. We're going to do the show again for the English debate, and I think it'll be really good. We're really looking forward to that. So, thanks for your time tonight. As always, that's David Knight-Legg, who is a political commentator from Alberta. Thank you so much.
You bet. Talk soon. Bye.
All right, folks. Well, we're going to wrap it up. I really appreciate everyone who stayed on and watched. Thank you for the super chats as well. Let me just pull open because I think we've been keeping a list of these super chats. So we had earlier in the show, Stefano gave us $140. Said, Candace, thank you. Let's go, Pierre. Yes. We had Farm Girl that gave $25 with no comment, but thank you, Farm Girl. We had DY Pep, $10. This is Carney's voice. Did they use AI when Carney responds to full Canadians? I don't know, but I did comment that I didn't like the voices that they used for the translators. I felt like they gave Pierre Poilievre an annoying voice, and it was very off-putting. And I think that Blanchett got the nice voice, the one with the British accent. So that was interesting. Anyway, folks, I'll be back. I'm going to do a show tomorrow for the Candace Malcolm Show, and I'm really looking forward to it because I'm going to provide the highlights of the debate and some of the lowlights of the responses to our questions. And you're going to want to see that. And then tomorrow night, we'll be back. The debate is later. I believe it starts at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And so we'll have a similar format. And we'll also try to get our reporters to call in after the event. And hopefully they'll get some more questions. I don't know. I don't know if they'll be allowed back in the building after tonight, but hopefully they will. And, you know, this is the great thing about these debates. Like, the reason that independent media are able to come into the room is because of a lawsuit that myself and Ezra Levant filed back in 2019. We sued the government. I sued to get Andrew Lawton, who was then my reporter, he's now a Conservative candidate, to get into the room. And Ezra sued to get his reporter at the time, who was Cian Bexty, into the room. We all went to court that day in Toronto. I had my baby with me because I didn't have a babysitter that day, but we had to go to court. We found out at the last minute that we had a court hearing. The judge sided with us and said, these are journalists. You cannot prevent them from going in and asking questions. And so he issued an emergency order for us to go in. So Andrew Lawton and Cian Bexty rushed to the debate, got their questions to Justin Trudeau. They both put great questions to Trudeau. Back then, Andrew Lawton asked about press freedom and tried to get Trudeau to pledge to allow independent reporters into the room, which he obviously wouldn't do. And Cian Bexty asked some great questions about Trudeau's time as a teacher at West Point Grey Academy. And you know, this is the point of a free society and a democracy, is that we should have a free press where journalists can ask any questions that they want. They can ask whatever the hell they want. And the fact that the questions are different, the questions make some elites feel uncomfortable. They make people like Rosemary Barton, Andrew Coyne clutch their pearls. That's a good thing. And, you know, politics is supposed to be filled with important questions. Sometimes they make you feel uncomfortable because we don't agree on everything. And so I do want to know what Mark Carney's position is on how many genders there are. And the fact that he failed to answer that question was interesting in of itself. And the fact that he swarmed his way through that other question about women-only spaces, a lot of women are listening to that. A lot of women hear that. They worry about their daughters in sports. They worry about female change rooms, female bathrooms. It's a legitimate concern. And the fact that he could not answer that question is newsworthy, right? And so I am very proud of those reporters for doing their job. And I am very grateful to the audience who has supported our ability to cover this election. We have a fund going at supportjuno.com. If you want to support our ability to do these kind of things, to pay the bills, to get these fellas onto airplanes, to go ask questions to these leaders, you can pitch in over there. Really appreciate it. We've got a few more super chats here. Dean Wolf gave us $25. Thank you very much, Dean. We've got Tracy Irons at $2.79. Thank you, Tracy. And folks, if you're not already, please head over to Juno News and subscribe to our website, subscribe to our newsletter. We put out independent news. We put out 10 or 12 stories every day, multiple videos. We have all kinds of special perks for subscribers. I really encourage you to support independent media by paying for it. It's a service that we provide. And it's, I think that independent media proved itself tonight. Very proud of the Rebel and the questions that they were able to ask. Again, questions that the legacy media should ask, right? The legacy media represents a very small portion of Canadians. And there are millions, if not tens of millions of Canadians who fall outside of that very narrow field of legacy media, the way that they think about the world, the questions that they're interested in, the things that they care about. And all the rest of us, we deserve to be represented as well and to have our voice heard on nights like tonight. So appreciate everyone for your support. We're going to wrap up this live stream now. I'll just say, behind the scenes, we had producers Sean and Phil. Thanks, guys. You guys are awesome. You guys rock. And then Clayton Demain as well flew out to Montreal. Hopefully he'll be able to get in line and get questions for tomorrow. Of course, Alex Stolten, a legend with that question, epic, and Kian Bexley doing just an absolutely fantastic job. So thanks so much, guys. And thanks everyone in the audience for tuning in. We'll wrap it up. Thank you so much. We'll be back again tomorrow. Candace Malcolm, God bless.